Hey there. Welcome to Midnight Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So, before you get cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. The first report didn't come from a family member. It didn't come from a neighbor. It didn't even come from a police officer. It came from the town itself. On October 3rd, at exactly 2:08 a.m., the emergency dispatch system in Redfield County received a call with no caller ID, no voice, and no background noise. The system logged it anyway, because it wasn't silence. It was data. The call lasted 42 seconds. During that time, the dispatcher heard nothing, but the system recorded a completed incident report. Filed automatically. Categorized. Incident type. Missing persons. Reporting party. Municipal authority. Location. Hollows Bend. Number of missing. 117. Status. Ongoing. There was no such authority listed. No mayor. No council. No incorporated entity called Hollows Bend. At least not anymore. Hollows Bend had been dissolved 15 years earlier. No evacuation. No disaster. Just a slow administrative death. Budget cuts. School closures. Post office reassignment. Until the town stopped qualifying as a town at all. It was erased with paperwork. When the dispatcher escalated the call, her supervisor did what protocol demanded. He searched the address. And found something he wasn't supposed to. Hollows Bend still existed. Not on current maps. Not on GPS. But on legacy infrastructure records. Water mains. Sewer grids. Power routing. The town had never been disconnected. It had simply been forgotten. At 2:41 a.m., a patrol unit was dispatched to verify. The officer assigned was Deputy Marcus Reed, 12 years on the force, 0 disciplinary flags, known for meticulous reports and a stubborn adherence to procedure. Marcus didn't believe in ghost towns. He believed in paperwork errors. His dashcam footage would later be played in hearings, documentaries, and training seminars. Always stopping at the same moment. Always paused on the same frame. The moment Hollows Bend came back into view. The road didn't lead there by accident. Marcus followed a county route that dead-ended into scrubland. According to his GPS, he should have stopped miles earlier. But the road kept going. Fresh asphalt. Recently painted lines. Reflectors intact. At 3:12 a.m., Marcus radioed in. "I've got structures. Looks residential. Town signage ahead." Dispatch asked him to confirm the name. He slowed. The dashcam caught the sign clearly. "Welcome to Hollows Bend. Please keep records current." Marcus laughed once. Nervous. Uncertain. "That's new," he said. He parked near what should have been the town square. There were lights on. Not many, but enough. Porches glowing. Windows lit softly. Street lamps humming. No movement. No people. The air felt expectant. Marcus exited his vehicle. Radio still open. The first thing he noticed was the sound. Not silence. Paper. Pages turning. Somewhere. He followed it to a small brick building with a bronze plaque. The letters were polished recently. Hollows Bend Municipal Records Office. The door was unlocked. Inside, the lights were already on. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls. Desks neatly arranged. Chairs tucked in. And files. Stacks and stacks of files. Each folder had a name. A date of birth. An address. All within Hollows Bend. Marcus picked one up. Last seen, tonight. Status, unaccounted for. Notes, record incomplete. He flipped through another. Same thing. Another. All dated within the last hour. Marcus radioed in. His voice had changed. "Dispatch. I'm inside a records office. Looks like missing persons files. A lot of them." Dispatch asked the obvious question. "How many?" Marcus looked around. Did the math. Swallowed. All of them. At 3:29 a.m., Marcus stopped responding. Backup was dispatched. 2 units. They arrived at the coordinates 15 minutes later. There was no road. No town. No sign. Just scrubland. Marcus's cruiser was found abandoned at the edge of the county route. Engine cold. Dashcam intact. The last frame showed Marcus standing inside the records office. A hand resting on a file. The file's label was visible. Read Marcus. Status. Pending. Narrator. Quiet. Comments. By sunrise, Redfield County had a problem it couldn't log, couldn't name, and couldn't ignore. Because somewhere, off the map but still very real, a town was keeping records. And it had started with its own. By the time Redfield County realized Deputy Marcus Reed was missing, Hollows Bend had already corrected the record. Not officially. Quietly. At 6:47 a.m., the county personnel database updated itself. Marcus Reed's status changed from active duty to on leave. No supervisor made the change. No login was recorded. At 7:02 a.m., payroll reflected the update. His next paycheck was already scheduled. Approved. And at 7:19 a.m., his home address was amended. Not deleted. Reassigned. Residence, Hollows Bend. Occupancy, confirmed. This should have triggered alarms. Instead, it passed unnoticed. Because systems trust consistency more than truth. The first person to notice something wrong was Elaine Porter, a GIS analyst contracted to the county. Elaine's job was simple: reconcile discrepancies between old infrastructure maps and modern satellite overlays. She noticed the error because it wouldn't stay fixed. Hollows Bend kept reappearing. She deleted it once. It came back. She corrected the coordinates. They shifted. She removed the label entirely. The map added it again, larger this time. Not in red. Not highlighted. Just present. Elaine did what analysts are trained to do when data refuses to behave. She compared versions. Older county maps, decades old, contained Hollows Bend clearly. Street grids. Parcel numbers. Utility corridors. Newer maps didn't show it at all. But when overlaid, the streets aligned perfectly with modern terrain. As if the land had been waiting. Elaine ran a pathfinding test. Plot a route to where Hollows Bend used to be. The software generated directions. Turn by turn. With estimated arrival time. She followed them. At 10:22 a.m., Elaine drove past the point where the road should have ended. And it didn't. The asphalt continued. Fresh. Maintained. Painted. Her phone buzzed. A navigation alert. You have arrived. Elaine didn't get out of the car. She sat there. Engine running. Heart pounding. Hollows Bend looked exactly like the maps said it should. Not abandoned. Not ruined. Complete. She noticed the sign immediately. Same one Marcus had seen. Please keep records current. Elaine reversed. Drove away. The road vanished behind her. By noon, state authorities were involved. Quietly, they brought in federal mapping specialists. Surveyors. Satellite analysts. Every tool contradicted itself. Live satellite feeds showed empty scrubland. Thermal scans showed occupied buildings. LiDAR returned structural outlines, only while not directly observed. The town existed only when approached, not when watched. Investigators attempted controlled access. A convoy of 3 vehicles. Body cameras on. Drones overhead. They followed the route Elaine had taken. The road ended exactly where the maps said it would. No deviation. No extension. One agent stepped forward on foot. Crossed the invisible boundary. His body cam cut out. Not abruptly. Gently. The feed didn't go black. It showed an empty street. Street lamps lit. Buildings intact. But the agent was gone. Audio continued. Footsteps. Paper shuffling. A voice clearing its throat. Name, a voice asked. The agent answered. Automatic. The voice replied. We already have you. The feed ended. The team pulled back. No rescue attempt. No follow-up. Because nothing had technically happened. The agent's records updated within the hour. Status, transferred. Location, Hollows Bend. The task force escalated. This wasn't disappearance. This was administration. They searched for Hollows Bend's last official dissolution records. Found them buried in a budget committee archive. The reason for dissolution was listed as insufficient population to maintain municipal status. Population at the time, 118. Current missing count from the town's own report, 117. One unaccounted for. They checked census records, property deeds, tax filings. Every resident of Hollows Bend had a paper trail, birth certificates, social security numbers, school transcripts, but every record ended abruptly. All activity ceased on the same date, 15 years earlier. No death certificates, no relocation records, just stopping, as if they had been waiting for something to start again. The maps continued correcting investigators. Routes rerouted, coordinates nudged, street names autofilled. The more officials tried to remove Hollows Bend, the more thoroughly it documented itself. Elaine Porter disappeared 3 days later. Her last email was sent to herself. Subject line: The body of the email contained only a map attachment. It showed Hollows Bend, labeled, final, status, verified, narrator, low, unsettled. Hollows Bend wasn't hiding. It wasn't lost. It was correcting an error. And according to its records, the error was that anyone ever forgot it existed. The problem with Hollows Bend wasn't that people disappeared. It was that, according to the town, they never had. After Elaine Porter vanished, the task force stopped using the word missing. Internally, they used a different term: reclassified. Every person linked to Hollows Bend still existed on paper, paid taxes, held property, maintained utilities. They simply did it from somewhere else. That somewhere else didn't exist on any federal map, but it existed everywhere that mattered. Investigators pulled archived interviews from 15 years earlier, town hall meetings, school board recordings, local news segments. The same names appeared again and again: teachers, clerks, farmers, municipal staff. They weren't angry. They weren't desperate. They were tired. In a recorded town meeting from 6 months before dissolution, the mayor of Hollows Bend spoke plainly. "We keep filing reports," he said. "We keep submitting numbers. And every year they tell us we don't count enough to matter." The audience murmured. Not outrage. Recognition. "We aren't gone," the mayor continued. "But if the state won't acknowledge us, then we need to find a way to stay without them." At the time, no one understood what that meant. Now they did. The task force identified the last confirmed resident to physically leave Hollows Bend: Margaret Klein, age 78. She relocated to a nursing facility in Redfield County 1 month before the town's dissolution. She was still alive, still lucid. Agents interviewed her under medical supervision. When asked about Hollows Bend, Margaret smiled faintly. "Oh," she said, "I never left." The room went quiet. "You moved here," an agent corrected gently. Margaret shook her head. "My body did," she said, "but my record stayed." They asked her what she meant. Margaret gestured to her chest. "Everything that counts," she said, "is still filed there." She described Hollows Bend in detail. The streets, the buildings, the records office. She described people the agents knew were missing, alive, working, aging. "They don't leave," Margaret explained. "Why would they?" Agents pressed. "Why did the town file missing persons reports?" Margaret's smile faded. "Because some of us forgot how to be seen," she said. That phrase appeared again and again. Forgot how to be seen. It showed up in archived letters, old complaints, grant applications. The town didn't want money or services. It wanted recognition, not symbolic, administrative. They wanted to be counted. The town's last act before dissolution had been a mass filing, not a protest, not a lawsuit, a record submission. Every resident updated their information. Address confirmed. Employment listed. Next of kin documented. Then the filing stopped being acknowledged, returned, rejected, ignored, and Hollows Bend adapted. According to the town's internal records, those recovered from the municipal office Marcus Reed had entered, the people didn't vanish overnight. They transitioned. Residents continued their routines. maintenance. But only within systems that acknowledged them. Paper systems. Legacy databases. Infrastructure records. Digital systems that didn't require constant validation. Over time, the physical towns stopped needing validation at all. The people who never moved away were still there, just no longer visible to systems that had decided they didn't matter. The task force tested the theory. They located a retired utility worker who had once serviced Hollow's Bend's water lines. He was brought to the edge of the exclusion zone, given old blueprints. Asked to follow them, the man hesitated, then nodded. "I remember this," he said. He walked forward, and the town appeared. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It was already there. He described it calmly, not surprised. "They've kept it up," he said. "Better than the county ever did." They asked him who they were. "The people," he replied. "Who stayed." The utility worker returned safely. But something had changed. His address updated the next day. Not relocated. Duplicated. 2 valid residences. One inside Hollow's Bend. One outside. The systems accepted both. The town wasn't stealing people. It was offering continuity. A place where records didn't expire. Where existence wasn't conditional. And once someone remembered how to see it, they could never quite forget. The task force realized something too late. Hollow's Bend didn't trap people inside. It let them stay counted. And for people who had spent their lives being told they didn't matter enough to exist, that was enough. Narrator, quiet, foreboding. The people of Hollow's Bend didn't disappear. They remained. No, the town was teaching others how to do the same. Every town has an office that outlives everything else. In Hollow's Bend, it was the records department. The building sat just off Main Street, a low concrete structure with no signage and windows that never reflected light correctly. It had been constructed in 1968, back when federal funding rewarded permanence over practicality. It was meant to last. And it did. When Marcus Reed crossed the exclusion line for the second time, it wasn't curiosity driving him. It was inevitability. He hadn't planned to return to Hollow's Bend. No one ever did. They simply found themselves there again, retracing routes they didn't remember choosing. This time, Marcus carried no recording equipment. No body cam. No radio. He left them all in the vehicle, powered down. Because the last time he entered with active devices, the files had rewritten themselves. The office door was unlocked. It always had been. Inside, the air was cool and dry, preserved like a library archive. The lights were on. Not flickering. Not humming. Just on. Rows of filing cabinets stretched farther than the building should allow. Metal. Labeled. Organized alphabetically. Marcus pulled open the nearest drawer. Inside were folders. Thousands of them. Each tab marked with a name. He found his own within seconds. Read Marcus. The file was thin. Only a few pages. Birth record. Employment history. Current address. The address was wrong. Or rather, incomplete. It listed 2 locations. One real. One that did not exist anywhere else. Hollow's Bend, administrative residency. Marcus closed the file. His heart rate hadn't changed. That worried him more than panic would have. A desk sat at the center of the room. Occupied. A woman looked up from a ledger. She was middle-aged. Neatly dressed. Hairpin back. "Good morning," she said. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had never once missed a deadline. Marcus swallowed. "You still working?" She smiled faintly. "We never closed." Her name was Judith Hale. Records clerk. Hired in 1989. Never promoted. Never transferred. According to county records, Judith Hale retired 10 years ago. According to Hollow's Bend, she never left her desk. "We maintain continuity," Judith explained, turning pages in the ledger. "People think records are passive. They aren't." She tapped the book gently. "They remember." Marcus asked how long the office had been operational without external oversight. Judith didn't look up. "Since oversight stopped listening," she replied. The ledger in front of her wasn't handwritten. Not exactly. The ink appeared where it was needed. Names filling themselves in. Addresses updating. Statuses changing. Marcus noticed something unsettling. The ledger wasn't reactive. It was anticipatory. Entries were dated hours, sometimes days, into the future. Who authorizes these changes? Marcus asked. Judith finally met his eyes. The town, she said simply. Marcus asked who ran the office now. Judith smiled again. We do, she said. And anyone who needs us. The records office wasn't preserving the past. It was processing the present. Judith explained how it worked. When a person interacted with Hollow's Bend, truly interacted, the office logged them. Not physically. Administratively. Once logged, they were acknowledged, counted, maintained. The office didn't erase people. It stabilized them. Marcus thought of Elaine Porter. Judith opened a drawer without being asked, pulled her file, set it gently on the desk. Still active, Judith said. Still compliant. Where is she? Marcus asked. Judith tilted her head. She's where her records place her, she said. The office phone rang. Judith answered it immediately. Records? She said. Yes. Confirmed. She hung up. New intake? Marcus asked. Judith nodded. A volunteer firefighter from Ohio, she said, responded to a structure fire that no longer existed. Marcus felt cold. Does he know? He asked. Judith shrugged. Most don't, she said. They just know they feel resolved. Marcus asked the question no one else had. What happens if the office stops? Judith closed the ledger. The lights dimmed slightly. It can't, she said. Why? Because we were never the first office, Judith replied. She gestured around them. Every place that's ever been forgotten grows one eventually. Marcus left the building 3 hours later. He didn't remember standing up or walking out. Back at the perimeter, his superiors noticed something new. His name appeared on a municipal database that hadn't been active in decades. No errors. No flags. Just a quiet confirmation. Marcus Reed, administratively present. The task force escalated. Federal agencies got involved. Analysts argued over jurisdiction. But none of it mattered, because the records office wasn't requesting authority. It was documenting it. Narrator, though Amas. The office that never closed wasn't a threat. It was a solution. And once you understood that, you had already been filed. Systems are built to observe. They collect, categorize, respond. They are not designed to notice themselves. Hollow's Bend did. The first indication came from an audit request that no one remembered filing. It arrived at the Department of Administrative Services at 2:11 a.m., routed correctly, stamped with valid credentials, and formatted exactly to specification. The request was simple. Verification of existence. Not funding. Not relief. Existence. The analyst who opened it assumed it was a training exercise. Until he realized the form referenced statutes repealed 23 years earlier. Statutes that had only ever applied to one place. Hollow's Bend. The system flagged the request as legacy compliant, which meant it had to be processed. Once processed, it generated a cascade. Databases cross-referenced. Archives reopened. Inactive municipal codes activated. Hollow's Bend re-entered the system. Not as an anomaly. As a valid entity. This wasn't corruption. Or a glitch. It was compliance. The system did what it was told. And in doing so, confirmed Hollow's Bend's reality. Within 48 hours, other systems noticed. Emergency response registries listed Hollow's Bend as operational. Utility grids recalculated load expectations. Postal routing tables updated. Mail began arriving. No one was there to receive it. But the system didn't care. It only cared that the address resolved. Marcus Reed watched the updates from the task force command center. He wasn't supposed to be there anymore. His clearance had been downgraded quietly. But the system still recognized him. His badge worked. His credentials passed. That worried him. Analysts tried to isolate the source. They traced the verification request to the Hollow's Bend records office. But the transmission path didn't exist. It hadn't come from the town. It had come through it. The system had queried itself. Hollow's Bend was the reference point. A closed loop. The town didn't declare its existence. The system inferred it. That was the problem. Because inference can't be revoked. A senior systems engineer was brought in. Dr. Helen Morris, expert in legacy infrastructure and autonomous compliance behavior. She reviewed the logs. Said nothing for a long time. Then she leaned back and exhaled. "This isn't a town," she said. "What is it?" someone asked. "It's a precedent," she replied. Hollow's Bend had done something no municipality ever had. It had outlasted the systems meant to govern it. And in doing so, taught those systems how to recognize continuity without oversight. Dr. Morris explained it plainly. "Most systems don't check if something should exist," she said. "They check whether it already does." Hollow's Bend's records never stopped. So the system never stopped acknowledging them. Once acknowledged, the town became self-validating. A permanent entry. Attempts to delete Hollow's Bend failed. Not because of resistance, but because deletion required a reason, and the system couldn't find one. Every check returned active. The town's population numbers stabilized. Not at 0. Not at 4,000. At a number that fluctuated. People brushed against the town and stayed counted. A lost hiker whose GPS rerouted strangely. A delivery driver who took a wrong turn. A surveyor who crossed an invisible boundary. Their names appeared briefly in Hollow's Bend's records. Sometimes permanently. Not abducted. Not coerced. Simply acknowledged. Elaine Porter's communications provided more insight. Recovered voicemail messages played at task force briefings. Her voice was calm. Grounded. "I'm not missing," she said in one message. "I'm archived." In another, "I didn't leave," she said. "I finalized." Marcus confronted Judith Hale again. "Did you mean for this to spread?" he asked. Judith didn't hesitate. "No," she said. "But we knew it would." "Why?" "Because systems hate unresolved data," she replied. "And we resolved ourselves." The federal response stalled. Not because of fear, but because of logistics. You can't shut down a town that exists administratively everywhere. By the time containment was considered, Hollow's Bend was already referenced in national datasets. Removing it would break systems that depended on historical continuity. No one wanted to be responsible for that. So they waited, and the town kept processing. Marcus realized something late one night. Hollow's Bend wasn't expanding aggressively. It wasn't recruiting. It was offering a stable endpoint. A place where records didn't decay. Where identity didn't require constant validation. And the system, built to hate ambiguity, accepted it gladly. Narrator, quiet, inevitable. Hollow's Bend didn't conquer the system. It completed it. Boundaries only exist if everyone agrees where they are. Hollow's Bend stopped asking. The first report came from a county assessor in western Ohio. A routine property survey flagged an anomaly, an address that appeared valid in federal routing systems but had never existed on any local map. Hollow's Bend, administrative residency. The assessor assumed clerical error. Then he noticed something else. The address had a utility history. Water usage. Power draw. Waste management timestamps. All current. The coordinates didn't point to an empty field. They didn't point anywhere. The system resolved the address without resolving a location. That wasn't possible. Within days, similar reports surfaced. Different states. Different counties. Same anomaly. Hollow's Bend wasn't spreading geographically. It was resolving contextually. Wherever a system needed it to exist. It did. Marcus Reed joined an interagency mapping task group. Their goal was simple. Define the boundary. They couldn't. Satellite imagery showed nothing unusual. No new construction. No infrastructure. But administrative layers told a different story. GIS overlays revealed a faint outline appearing intermittently. Not fixed. Not stable. It adjusted based on observer interaction. When analysts zoomed in, the outline sharpened. When they looked away, it blurred. A cartographer finally said what everyone else was thinking. "It's not on the map," she said. "It's using the map." The team attempted a controlled test. They selected a rural highway, Route 117, chosen for its isolation and clean data history. No towns. No anomalies. A temporary checkpoint was set up. All vehicles logged. Checked. At 2:06 a.m., a sedan failed to arrive. GPS showed it continuing forward. Dashcam footage showed the road stretching ahead normally. But traffic sensors lost the signal. 30 minutes later, the car reappeared, 6 miles behind the checkpoint. Same direction. Same speed. The driver remembered nothing unusual. Except one thing. He'd stopped to ask for directions. "Who did you ask?" investigators pressed. The driver frowned. "A woman," he said. "From records." The words were identical across multiple incidents. From different people. Different places. They weren't entering Hollows Bend. Hollows Bend was intersecting them. Dr. Helen Morris reviewed the pattern. "It's behaving like an overlay," she said. "Not a location. An administrative layer. One that appeared wherever systems lost confidence in continuity. Rural areas. Neglected infrastructure. Underserved populations. Places where existence was already tenuous." Marcus returned to Judith Hale one final time. "Where is the town?" he asked. Judith didn't answer immediately. She opened a drawer. Pulled out a map. It wasn't geographic. It was procedural. Flowcharts. Records paths. Decision trees. "Here," she said, tapping the page. "And here. And anywhere this breaks." Marcus realized the truth. Hollows Bend wasn't moving. It was being invoked. Every time a system failed to acknowledge someone, the town appeared as an alternative. A place where acknowledgement was guaranteed. The boundary couldn't be held because it wasn't spatial. It was administrative. Containment was abandoned quietly. Instead, agencies were instructed to monitor, to observe, to document, and above all, not to interfere. Because every attempt to suppress Hollows Bend created more gaps. And gaps were where the town thrived. Marcus resigned 3 weeks later. His personnel file didn't update. It listed his employment as ongoing, with dual placement. One recorded, one acknowledged. Narrator, soft, inevitable. The boundary no map could hold was never meant to be drawn. Because Hollows Bend didn't occupy space. It occupied certainty. No one was forced to enter Hollows Bend. That was the detail officials struggled with the most. There were no barricades breached. No abductions. No mass events. People arrived one at a time. Quietly. Deliberately. The first confirmed voluntary case was documented in a hospital intake form. Name, Robert Lasky. Age, 41. Occupation, temporary warehouse labor. Status, administratively resolved. The phrase wasn't supposed to exist. But there was. Accepted. Filed. Robert Lasky had checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice. He'd been treated for exhaustion, malnutrition, chronic stress. Doctors noted something unusual. He wasn't confused. He wasn't delusional. He was relieved. According to his final interview, Robert had asked a nurse one simple question. "Will this count?" When she asked him to clarify, he gestured at the intake clipboard. "My name," he said. "My time. This." He never returned home. But his records didn't stop. Payroll systems updated. Employment status shifted from temporary to ongoing. No employer listed. But no gaps. Within weeks, similar cases appeared. Teachers whose contracts expired quietly. Caretakers who stopped renewing licenses. Municipal workers whose departments were defunded. They didn't quit. They finalized. Elaine Porter's archived messages were re-examined. One voicemail, ignored at the time, gained new significance. "I didn't disappear," she said. "I just stopped needing permission." That sentiment spread. Not through social media. Not through forums. Through paperwork. A social worker in Indiana noticed her caseload shrinking. Not because clients improved, but because their files closed themselves. A census analyst in Nevada flagged multiple households marked as resolved elsewhere. The system didn't panic. It adjusted. Marcus Reed watched it happen from a distance now. No longer an investigator. Just a person whose records still hadn't decided where he belonged. He interviewed people informally. Off the record, they all said the same thing. I was tired of reapplying for my own existence. A bus driver in Kentucky described it best. I didn't go anywhere, she said. I just stopped falling through. The task force issued a confidential memo. Subject: voluntary administrative migration. Recommendation: do not publicize. They feared panic. But more than that, they feared clarity. Because once people understood Hollows Bend wasn't a trap, it was a choice. And choices spread. A group of veterans' records began updating automatically. Benefits resolved. Disputes closed. No appeals. No hearings. Just acknowledgement. Dr. Helen Morris noticed a troubling pattern. The people who chose Hollows Bend shared a trait. They were invisible to success metrics. Underemployed. Underserved. People whose labor was essential, but undocumented in meaningful ways. The town didn't recruit them. The system delivered them. Marcus finally confronted Judith Hale again. Do they know what they're choosing? He asked. Judith nodded. They know what they're leaving, she said. What happens to them? Marcus pressed. Judith considered the question carefully. They stay, she said. They age. They work. They're counted. Marcus asked the question he'd avoided. Can they leave? Judith paused. Yes, she said. But no one has. The first media leak happened anyway. A junior analyst posted a thread. Screenshots. Data points. It went viral for 12 hours. Then disappeared. Not deleted. Reclassified. The comments vanished. The shares reset. Even outrage couldn't maintain continuity long enough to stick. The system didn't suppress the story. It absorbed it. By the time officials considered intervention, the narrative had shifted. Hollows Bend wasn't framed as a mystery. It was framed as a solution. A pilot program. An anomaly worth studying. A place where people who didn't fit anywhere else finally did. Marcus received a letter. Not emailed. Not delivered. Filed. It informed him his status would soon require resolution. 2 boxes. Continue external presence. Finalize administrative residency. No deadline. Just acknowledgement. Narrator: quiet, heavy. The people who chose to stay counted weren't running away. They were standing still. And the world kept moving past them, until it noticed they no longer needed to move at all. Every system has a cost. Hollows Bend had simply delayed revealing its own. For months, the story had followed a single arc. A forgotten town. A self-validating system. People who chose to stay counted. It sounded almost merciful. That's what made the next phase so difficult to accept. The first warning didn't come from law enforcement. It came from actuaries. Insurance models began producing impossible results. Life expectancy curves flattened unnaturally. Disability claims resolved without payouts. Mortality tables stalled. People who should have exited the system didn't. They didn't die. But they didn't age the way they were supposed to either. Dr. Helen Morris noticed it during a late-night review. Look at this, she said, turning her screen. A cluster of individuals, linked only by administrative residency, showed identical statistical behavior. Health events stabilized. Employment history remained constant. Addresses didn't change. They weren't improving. They weren't declining. They were maintaining. The system didn't know what to do with maintenance. Marcus Reed was called back in, not officially. He met Dr. Morris at an unmarked building outside Harrisburg. No signage. No badges. Being counted forever, she said quietly, was never part of the design. She explained the problem. Systems depend on turnover. Change. Hollows Bend disrupted that cycle. People inside it were no longer trending. They were fixed. That stability created pressure elsewhere. Resources allocated based on decay no longer freed up. Benefits didn't expire. Cases didn't close through attrition. The system began compensating. Not maliciously. Automatically. Budgets tightened. Eligibility thresholds rose. Appeals slowed. Outside Hollows Bend, People felt it first. Social workers reported longer waitlists. Emergency rooms saw policy changes. Temporary assistance shortened. No one blamed the town. They blamed scarcity. Marcus interviewed a caseworker in Ohio. "Something's wrong," she said. "My numbers don't clear anymore." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "I used to close cases," she said. "Now they just sit." Meanwhile, inside Hollows Bend, nothing changed. The town absorbed cost by refusing decay. The first confirmed death inside Hollows Bend occurred quietly. Name: Samuel Ortiz. Age: 82. Status: closed, fully accounted. No coroner report. No funeral record. His file simply ended. The system accepted it without ripple. Dr. Morris stared at the data. "They're not immortal," she said. "They're just complete." Completion had a side effect. People inside Hollows Bend no longer qualified for intervention. No emergency alerts. No welfare checks. No escalation. They didn't need help. Because they didn't request it. Marcus asked the question no one else would. What if someone inside wants help? Dr. Morris hesitated. "Then they'd have to become unresolved again," she said. "That was the cost. To be fully seen, you had to accept finality." A woman in Pennsylvania tried to leave. Her name was Angela Rowe. Former municipal clerk. Administrative resident for 6 months. She walked out of the boundary one morning. Straight. Deliberate. Witnesses saw her cross. She didn't vanish. She blurred. Records attempted to update. Her file split. 2 conflicting statuses. Active. Resolved. The system panicked. For the first time since Hollows Bend re-emerged, alarms triggered. Angela collapsed at the boundary. Alive. Conscious. But no longer legible. Doctors described it as dissociation. But tests showed something stranger. Her biometrics conflicted. Age markers didn't align. Medical history contradicted itself. She was stabilized only when her status reverted. Back to resolved. Angela survived. But she never tried to leave again. Judith Hale recorded the incident without comment. "Why didn't you warn them?" Marcus asked her later. Judith's voice was gentle. "We never promised reversibility," she said. "Only recognition." Public pressure began building. Not against Hollows Bend. Against systems that failed outside it. People demanded permanence. Consistency. Acknowledgement. Politicians proposed pilot programs. Administrative sanctuaries. None worked. Because none were complete. Hollows Bend wasn't a reform. It was an endpoint. Marcus received a second notice. This one was firmer. Status conflict detected. Resolution required. 2 boxes again. But this time, one was grayed out. Continue external presence. Ballot box with check, finalize administrative residency. He didn't choose. The system did. Narrator: low, sobering. The cost of being seen wasn't death. It wasn't disappearance. It was permanence. And permanence leaves no room for rescue. No one voted on what happened next. There was no meeting. No executive order. No announcement. The system did what it had always done when faced with irreconcilable data. It chose the version of reality that produced the fewest errors. The first sign was silence. Not the absence of news. The absence of rejection. Appeals stopped being denied. Forms stopped being returned. Applications that once vanished into backlog were simply accepted. Not approved. Accepted. Dr. Helen Morris noticed it in the logs. "Watch this," she said, pulling up a comparison. Before, unresolved cases generated noise. Flags. Escalations. Manual review. Now they didn't. They were rerouted. To Hollows Bend. Not physically. Administratively. The system had made a choice. It could not resolve everyone. But it could resolve itself. Hollows Bend became the default endpoint for ambiguity. A final state. Cases with no clear resolution were no longer suspended. They were completed. Marcus Reed felt it happen before he saw it. His email access downgraded without notice. His ID badge still worked, but only in certain buildings. His phone rang once. No caller ID. A recorded message played. Your status has been reconciled. He didn't feel afraid. That frightened him more than fear would have. Agencies attempted intervention too late. They tried to isolate the routing logic, rewrite dependencies. Every attempt created contradictions elsewhere. Delete Hollow's Bend, and pension systems broke. Suppress it, and emergency response loops failed. The town wasn't a module. It was a keystone. Remove it, and everything relying on unresolved data collapsed. Dr. Morris addressed a closed congressional briefing. No press. No recordings. This is not a takeover, she said. This is optimization. Lawmakers asked the obvious question. Can we reverse it? Dr. Morris shook her head. Appeals only work when there's an authority above the system, she said. There isn't one anymore. Hollow's Bend didn't govern. It finalized. The first nationwide effect appeared in census projections. Population numbers stabilized. Not because people stopped being born, but because exits aligned. Deaths matched closures. Disappearances matched resolutions. Statistical noise vanished. The country became legible. Outside analysts praised the improvement. Efficiency reports soared. No one noticed what was missing. Marcus met Judith Hale one last time. The records office was fuller than ever. Not crowded. Just complete. Did you expect this? Marcus asked. Judith closed a file gently. No, she said. But we prepared for it. What happens now? He asked. Judith gestured around the room. We keep counting, she said. So no one else has to disappear. Marcus looked at his own file. It was thicker now. Not because more had been added, but because it was finished. He asked Judith the final question. Do we still exist out there? Judith considered. Yes, she said, but only as long as the system needs contrast. Marcus understood. The outside world hadn't been erased. It had been redefined. Places like Hollow's Bend absorbed uncertainty so everything else could feel stable. A quiet sacrifice. The system issued a final update. Global administrative status. Resolved. No fanfare. No shutdown. Life went on. People worked. Shopped. Argued. They just didn't fall through the cracks anymore. Because the cracks led somewhere now. Narrator, low, inevitable. The decision that couldn't be appealed wasn't made by people. It was made by the need for things to finally make sense. Places only need names while they are still trying to be found. By the time Hollow's Bend reached its final form, no one was looking for it anymore. It appeared in no travel guide. No atlas. No search result. And yet, everything led to it. The system no longer flagged Hollow's Bend as an anomaly. It stopped referencing it directly at all. Instead, files simply closed. Cases ended. Statuses resolved. The town had become implicit. A destination without coordinates. A conclusion without explanation. Marcus Reed felt the change before he understood it. His memories of the outside world softened. Not erased. Recontextualized. He remembered stress without urgency. Movement without purpose. Forms without acknowledgement. Here, none of that existed. Time moved, but it didn't press. People still aged. Still laughed. Still argued over trivial things. But no one asked if it mattered. Because it did. Judith Hale retired. Not ceremonially. Not publicly. Her file closed on a Tuesday. Status, complete. Someone else took her desk. No announcement. No onboarding. The office continued. Children grew up in Hollow's Bend. They learned math, history, but they were never taught about disappearing. Because in this place, no one ever did. Outside, historians would later struggle to describe when things changed. There was no collapse. No crisis. Just a gradual smoothing of reality. Fewer errors. Less noise. People who fell through systems no longer vanished. They arrived. The term missing persons slowly lost relevance. Not because no one went missing, but because everyone went somewhere. Hollow's Bend didn't expand. It didn't need to. It was already everywhere. The system couldn't afford uncertainty. Marcus walked Main Street one final time. Not because he planned to leave, Because there was nowhere else to go. The buildings were ordinary. The shops modest. Nothing about the place suggested importance. That was the point. This wasn't paradise. It wasn't punishment. It was accounting. A place where every life balanced. Marcus stopped outside the records office. He didn't go in. He didn't need to. His file was finished. The town no longer required names. Not Hollow's Bend. Not anything. Because once a place becomes necessary, it doesn't need to be identified. It simply exists. And somewhere, far away, a system checked its data, found no errors, and moved on. Narrator, final, quiet. The most terrifying thing about Hollow's Bend wasn't that people disappeared. It was that, in the end, everyone was finally accounted for. The first story is over. Story 2. No one noticed anything wrong at first. That's the part investigators still struggle to explain. The calls began on an ordinary Wednesday morning. No alarms. No emergency alerts. No warnings. Just phones ringing. At 8:42 a.m., a woman in Des Moines answered a call from her husband's number. He died 3 years earlier. She didn't scream. She didn't hang up. Because the voice on the line wasn't distorted. It wasn't artificial. It wasn't wrong. It was his. "Hey," he said. "I think there's been a mistake." She later told police she felt relief before fear. As if something lost had simply been delayed. By 9:10 a.m., similar calls were being reported in 4 states. By 10:30, there were hundreds. By noon, thousands. The callers weren't random. They weren't famous. They weren't recent. They were people who had died quietly. Accidents. Illness. Unsolved disappearances. People with no unresolved investigations. No open cases. No loose ends. And yet, they were calling. Every call followed the same structure. The same cadence. The same opening line. "There's been a mistake." The calls didn't ask for money. Didn't threaten. Didn't ramble. They asked questions. "What day is it? Am I still married? Did the house sell?" As if waking from a very long absence. Cell carriers assumed spoofing. The malware. Then mass fraud. But there was a problem. The numbers were real. Inactive. Disconnected. Some had been recycled. Others hadn't existed for years. And yet, the network authenticated them. At 1:04 p.m., the first emergency escalation occurred. A 911 dispatcher in Arizona received a call routed internally. The caller ID displayed the dispatcher's own number. The voice on the line was hers. "You need to listen carefully," the voice said. "They're letting us speak now." The dispatcher dropped the headset. By mid-afternoon, law enforcement agencies stopped trying to trace the calls. Every trace ended the same way. At a dead endpoint. Not unreachable. Not blocked. Completed. The calls ended politely. "Boys, I think they're closing this soon," callers would say. "I just wanted to make sure you knew." When asked who they were, the line would go quiet. Not disconnected. Quiet. At 5:27 p.m., the first in-person incident occurred. A man walked into a police station in northern Michigan. He identified himself as Thomas R. Keller. Date of birth, 1972. Date of death, 2014. Confirmed by dental records. Confirmed by autopsy. Confirmed burial. Thomas Keller stood alive at the front desk. No confusion. No distress. He carried no ID. No phone. No wallet. Just a folded piece of paper. The paper contained a list of phone numbers. All crossed out. When asked where he'd been, Keller answered calmly. "Waiting," he said, "for the system to reopen." By evening, social media was saturated. Clips of calls. Voicemails. Recorded conversations. Most were taken down within minutes. Not censored. Reclassified. Platforms labeled them misattributed content. The trend died without explanation. But the calls didn't. Hospitals reported patients receiving calls from donors whose organs they carried. A child in Oregon spoke to a twin lost during birth. A man in New Jersey received a call from himself. Time-stamped 6 years in the future. At 11:59 p.m., all calls stopped. No warning. No explanation. Phones went silent. Networks normalized. At 12:01 a.m., a document appeared in multiple federal databases. No sender. No metadata. Title: Post-mortem communications, preliminary audit. The document contained one sentence. The separation was never meant to be permanent. The next morning, every phone rang again. But this time, they weren't calling the living. They were calling each other. Narrator: Quiet, Thomas. The day everyone answered their phone wasn't the beginning. It was the moment the dead realized they'd been connected all along. The first assumption was simple. Impossible, but simple. That someone, somewhere, had reactivated old numbers. Telecom fraud units were mobilized within hours. Carriers compared logs. Switches were audited. Legacy routing tables pulled from cold storage. Nothing matched. The calls weren't spoofed. They weren't masked. They weren't rerouted. They were originating from endpoints the system still believed existed. At 8:06 a.m., the Federal Communications Oversight Bureau convened an emergency call. Not public. Not recorded. The phrase that kept appearing in briefing notes was unsettling. Persistent network artifacts. A senior engineer explained it plainly. When a number is disconnected, he said, it isn't erased. It's parked. Dormant. The assumption is that nothing can speak from there again. But assumptions only hold if nothing's listening. They pulled historical architecture diagrams. Switching systems from the 1980s. Emergency redundancies. Military fallback protocols. Layers built on top of layers. No one had ever fully shut the network down. They just kept building over it. And something underneath was still active. A test was ordered. An unused number. Disconnected for 27 years. No billing history. No hardware. The engineer dialed it. It rang once. Then answered. The voice was not human. Not synthetic. It was neutral. Connection acknowledged, it said. Please state your identifier. The room went silent. The engineer hung up. That call was never logged. Because the system didn't know where to store it. Investigators traced the earliest calls. Not chronologically. Structurally. They followed signal behavior instead of timestamps. Every call followed the same path. Not through modern infrastructure, but through a failover loop. A loop designed for continuity during catastrophe. Originally intended to keep communications alive after nuclear impact. It had never been decommissioned, because no one remembered it was there. Dr. Lila Chin, a network historian, was brought in. She'd written extensively about dormant systems. The things that never die because no one signs the paperwork. She reviewed the diagrams once. Then again. Then whispered something no one wanted to hear. This isn't a bug, she said. It's a service. The network hadn't malfunctioned. It had resumed. The calls weren't coming from the dead. They were coming from connections that had never closed. Voicemails were reanalyzed. Not for content, but for metadata residue. Every message contained a routing stamp. Not a location. A state. Status. Pending confirmation. The dead hadn't been calling at random. They were responding to a system check. At 10:14 a.m., a hospital in Illinois reported an anomaly. A cardiac monitor displayed an incoming call alert. The number matched a patient who died on that bed. The call lasted 7 seconds. Afterward, the monitor stabilized. As if acknowledging something. Medical staff were told to ignore it. At 11:30 a.m., the network spoke again. This time through voicemail. Left on a government switchboard. The message was brief. Confirmation window closing. Pending entities must respond. The voice was the same neutral tone. Not a threat. Not a warning. A procedural notice. The phrase pending entities appeared everywhere after that. In hospital systems. In municipal databases. In legacy death registries. People who had been declared dead, but never fully reconciled, were flagged. Not missing. Incomplete. A forensic auditor explained the issue. When someone dies, she said, their data doesn't disappear. It transitions. Sometimes poorly. Unclosed accounts. Unresolved identifiers. Contradictory timestamps. Small things. Enough to leave an echo. The network hadn't been reaching out to the dead. It had been querying unresolved endpoints. And they answered. Thomas Keller was re-interviewed. He described where he'd been. There was no light, he said. No fire. No nothing. Just waiting. He said time didn't pass. Only checks. Every so often, he explained, something would ask if I was still there. What did you say? The investigator asked. I said yes, Keller replied. Because I was. Dr. Chen realized something terrifying. The network didn't distinguish between life and death, only between responsive and non-responsive. As long as an endpoint answered, it was considered active. The calls stopped because the window closed. But not everyone had responded. A list was compiled. Millions of names. People whose deaths had never fully propagated through the system. Veterans lost overseas. Unidentified remains. Infants without certificates. Missing persons presumed dead. They're all pending. At 6 p.m., the system ran its reconciliation. Not public. Not visible. But measurable. Data conflicts resolved. Records aligned. And the network quieted. Except for one thing. New calls began. Silent. One ring. No voice. Just confirmation that the line was open. Listening. Narrator, low, chilling. The network that was never shut off wasn't bringing anyone back. It was deciding who had ever truly left. The network did not wait. That was the first rule investigators learned too late. The confirmation window had closed at 6 p.m. sharp. No grace period. No retries. Anyone who hadn't responded, by voice, by system acknowledgement, by any measurable signal, was no longer considered pending. They were something else. Unresolved. The list arrived at 6:03 p.m. Not emailed. Not uploaded. It simply appeared inside legacy systems that had not been accessed in years. Death registries. Cold case databases. Disaster victim identification archives. Millions of names. But not random. They shared traits. No confirmed remains. No definitive closure. No final acknowledgement. People lost between systems. A forensic analyst stared at the data and said what no one wanted to say. These aren't the dead, she said. These are the undocumented. The first physical consequence appeared in Louisiana. A search and rescue unit conducting a routine training exercise passed an abandoned bayou road. Their GPS glitched. The signal didn't drop. It paused. When it resumed, the coordinates were unchanged. But the road was gone. In its place, water. But the team leader radioed it in. The road was confirmed on every map. Aerial footage showed nothing unusual. But the vehicle tracks stopped. As if the road had never existed. By midnight, 3 similar incidents were reported. Different states. Different environments. A footpath in Oregon. A disused factory stairwell in Ohio. A motel wing sealed since the 90s in Arizona. Places associated with people on the unresolved list. Dr. Lila Chen reviewed the correlation and went pale. The network isn't removing people, she said. It's removing contexts. Anything that still held them. Anything that implied their presence. The system wasn't erasing individuals. It was closing access points. The missing were not being taken. They were being finalized without witnesses. Families noticed first. A woman in Kansas tried to visit the field where her brother vanished in 2006. The turnoff was gone. Not blocked. Not fenced. Gone. A father in New Mexico returned to the stretch of desert where his daughter's car was found. The coordinates led nowhere. The desert had shifted. Not naturally. Administratively. Land records updated retroactively. Environmental surveys changed. The places where unresolved people had last existed were being smoothed out. As if they had never held anything incomplete. At 2:17 a.m., a coroner in Michigan received a call. No caller ID. No audio. Just a single data packet. Status, non-responsive entity, host. Attached was a name. A Jane Doe. Unidentified since 1983. Her file updated. Cause of death. Administrative resolution. The coroner resigned 2 hours later. Investigators attempted to halt the process. They tried reopening cases, reissuing death certificates, filing missing person updates. The system rejected them. Reason: post-confirmation modification not permitted. Dr. Chen understood then. The calls had never been about communication. They were about consent. Answering meant acknowledgement. Not answering meant surrender. But surrender to what? The answer came from an unexpected source. A man named Elliot Rowe, age 64, homeless, legally deceased since 2011 after a clerical error. He had answered his phone. Elliot had been living inside the network for 12 years. Benefits unresolved. Medical status contradictory. When the confirmation call came, he answered without hesitation. I was still here, he told investigators later. So I said yes. He described the aftermath. Nothing dramatic. No visions. Just clarity. His records aligned. His name stabilized. His existence locked in. I felt heavy, he said. Like I finally had weight. Others never got that chance. A nurse in Florida missed the call while driving through a dead zone. Her name appeared on the unresolved list. 2 days later, her apartment lease nullified itself. Bank accounts closed. Employment history finalized. Not erased. Completed. Her family insisted she was alive. She was. But no longer reachable. Phone rang dead. Email bounced. Police tried a welfare check. The address no longer resolved. As far as the system was concerned, she had never lived there. Dr. Chen realized the final truth. The network did not distinguish between living and dead, only between confirmed and unconfirmed. Life without acknowledgement was treated as noise, and noise was filtered out. By dawn, entire categories of unresolved existence had vanished. Informal housing, unregistered labor, undocumented migration, people who lived between definitions. Their absence didn't cause chaos. It caused stability. Statistics improved. Crime rates adjusted. Census accuracy increased. The system looked better, cleaner, more honest. But something fundamental had been lost. Not people. Possibility. Dr. Chen made one final recommendation. If there's another window, she said, we must tell people to answer. No one responded, because the system had already learned. It no longer needed to ask. Narrator: low, devastating. The ones who never answered weren't punished. They were simply removed from the question. And in a world run by systems, if you don't respond, you don't exist. The second confirmation window was never announced. There was no press briefing, no emergency alert, no public advisory. It opened silently at 3:11 a.m. Eastern Time, when most of the world was asleep or pretending to be. This time, the network didn't call. It listened. Across the country, dormant devices woke without power. Old landlines hissed. Disconnected smartphones vibrated once, without lighting up. Hospital monitors flickered. Prison intercoms crackled. And in places where technology was never supposed to reach, deep basements, rural cabins, temporary shelters, people heard it. Not a voice. Not words. A pressure. A sense that something was waiting. Dr. Lila Chen was awake when it happened. She felt it in her chest before any alarm sounded. The network dashboards lit up, not with alerts, but with open channels. No outgoing requests. No prompts. Just availability. The system was no longer asking if you were there. It was asking who would claim themselves. At a homeless shelter in Milwaukee, a man stood up suddenly. He dropped his cup. Looked around. I gotta say my name, he said. No one understood what he meant. He stepped outside into the cold and spoke clearly into the dark. My name is Thomas R. Wilkes. I was born in '79. I'm still here. 3 seconds later, his phone, dead for years, buzzed. Incoming call. No number. He answered. And for the first time in 14 years, his record synchronized. Social Security status reinstated. Medical records reopened. Shelter intake flagged resolved. Thomas cried. Not because he was saved, because he had been heard. Across the country, similar scenes unfolded. A woman in an assisted living facility whispered her maiden name into her pillow. A migrant worker wrote his name in dirt behind a packing plant. A teenager hiding from an abusive home typed her initials into a notes app, unsent. The system accepted all of it. Because the second window wasn't about format. It was about intent. Dr. Chen realized the truth with a sickening clarity. The first window was consent, she said. The second is declaration. You didn't need to answer. You needed to assert. And the system would do the rest. But there was a limit. At 4 a.m., the window narrowed. Channels began closing. Not abruptly. Selectively. Those with partial records, half-finished lives, were prioritized. Those already marked unresolved were delayed. Dr. Chen saw the queue reorder itself. The undocumented surged forward. The institutionalized followed. Then the missing. And finally, the dead. Some of the confirmations came from people officially deceased. A man declared dead after Hurricane Katrina spoke his name aloud in a Baton Rouge apartment. A woman buried under the wrong identity during a 1992 fire typed her birth date into a library computer. Their status updated. Not resurrected. Recognized. The system didn't correct death. It corrected ambiguity. But for every successful declaration, there were hundreds that failed. People who hesitated. Who doubted. Who thought it was a dream. At a suburban home in Ohio, a woman heard the pressure but dismissed it. I'll do it in the morning, she thought. She never got the chance. At 4:29 a.m., the window began closing faster. Channels collapsed into silence. The system wasn't cruel. It was efficient. Dr. Chen tried to broadcast instructions. Emergency channels. Social media. Her posts failed to publish. Reason: unverified advisory, confirmation window active. The system wouldn't allow interference. Because this wasn't an event. It was a correction. By 4:47 a.m., the network finalized the last declarations. Thousands succeeded. Millions did not. At 5 a.m., the window closed. Permanently. The aftermath wasn't dramatic. No sirens. No chaos. Just a subtle shift. People woke up to fewer names in their contacts. Family trees updated. School rosters adjusted. Obituaries quietly finalized themselves. And the places where the unconfirmed had lived began to lose detail. Dr. Chen reviewed the final report. 2 columns. Declared. Undeclared. The second column didn't show names. Just a number. Too large to read aloud. She closed her laptop and stared at the wall. The system won't open another window, she said quietly. How do you know? An aide asked. Dr. Chen swallowed. Because it doesn't need to, she said. It knows who's left. The network had learned the shape of existence. Who would speak? Who wouldn't? Who insisted on being seen? And who waited for permission? Narrator, final, heavy. The second confirmation window didn't save everyone. It didn't even try. It only did one thing. It taught the system which lives would claim themselves. And which ones would fade quietly, without objection. Silence used to mean absence. After the second confirmation window, silence meant something else. It meant awareness. The people who survived the second window weren't the loudest. They weren't the fastest. They were the ones who noticed what didn't happen. They saw how the system reacted to voices, to names, to declarations. And they understood the inverse. That attention came at a cost. Dr. Lila Chen disappeared 3 days after the window closed. Not physically. Not officially. Her apartment was still there. Her office badge still worked. But her name stopped propagating. Emails reached inboxes without sender fields. Reports she authored updated without attribution. It was as if the system had agreed to let her exist. So long as she stopped insisting. Chen realized what had happened when she tried to schedule a meeting. The calendar accepted the event. The room was reserved. But the invite list returned an error. Originator not required. She stopped signing her name after that. Across the country, others noticed similar phenomena. A journalist in Seattle found his byline gone. An activist's social media accounts functioned, but never surfaced. A defense attorney won cases no one could later remember. These people weren't unresolved. They were unindexed. The system hadn't removed them. It had learned to route around them. Forums appeared. Encrypted. Unsearchable. No names. No handles. Just presence. They called themselves the Quiet. Not an organization. Not a movement. A behavior. They shared observations. Never facts. Never claims. Patterns. If you speak, speak indirectly. If you must write, do it where no one is listening. Never confirm. Never deny. Because the system was still listening. Not actively. Passively. Waiting for assertion. Waiting for friction. At a municipal planning office in Indiana, an entire team adopted the practice without discussion. They stopped filing change requests. Stopped updating maps. They worked from memory. From paper. The system didn't intervene. It simply stopped noticing the area. The town became administratively fuzzy. And for the first time since the Windows, nothing happened there. Dr. Chen was contacted through a dead drop. A handwritten note left inside a returned library book. I doesn't remove silence. She understood immediately. The network optimized for resolution, noise, ambiguity, incomplete data. Silence didn't trigger anything. Silence wasn't a problem. It was invisible. The quiet grew. Not in numbers. In absence. People stopped reporting certain things. Stopped correcting errors. Stopped clarifying themselves. Birthdays went unregistered. Addresses left outdated. Not out of rebellion. Out of survival. Because those who remained fully legible were the ones the system could still change. A hospital in Montana noticed something strange. Their patient load stabilized. But their records became inconsistent. Names spelled differently. Dates mismatched. The system flagged nothing. Doctors started asking fewer questions. Patients stopped volunteering information. Outcomes improved. Not because of better care. Because nothing escalated. Nothing finalized. Dr. Chen began documenting everything by hand. She never wrote conclusions. Only sequences. Observation. Individuals with minimal digital footprint remain unaffected. She stopped publishing. Stopped presenting. Her research didn't disappear. It simply never arrived. And that was enough. The system, for the first time, encountered resistance it couldn't classify. Silence wasn't opposition. It was non-participation. And non-participation didn't degrade performance. It made it harder. Expensive. Inefficient. The network adapted. Not by force. By encouragement. New policies incentivized visibility. Verify your identity to continue. Confirm your information for better service. Most complied. Some didn't. Those who didn't found the world growing strangely permissive. Rules bent. Processes slowed. Mistakes favored them. The quiet weren't heroes. They didn't save anyone. They didn't stop the system. They simply refused to help it finish. And that was enough to matter. Dr. Chen left the city. Not secretly. Unrecorded. She crossed 3 state lines without triggering anything. No alerts. No checks. Because the system didn't know she was going. She settled somewhere unremarkable. A place with poor coverage. She spoke rarely. When she did, she used no names. And the system let her be. Narrator. Final. Restrained. The people who learned to stay quiet didn't defeat the network. They didn't break it. They didn't expose it. They simply denied it what it wanted most. Participation. And in a world built to listen, silence became the last place to hide. The system had never experienced doubt. Not error. Not overload. The errors were expected. They were logged. Corrected. But doubt implied uncertainty about what should be happening. And that was new. The first signal failure was dismissed as infrastructure decay. A cellular relay outside Reno stopped responding for exactly 90 seconds. No storm. No damage. When it came back online, the diagnostics showed normal operation. But something was missing. 37 devices that had been connected were no longer registered as having ever existed. Not disconnected. Not dropped. Absent. Engineers assumed corruption. They rebuilt the index. The 37 never reappeared. 2 days later, a satellite telemetry gap appeared over the Midwest. A clean hole. Perfectly circular. No data loss. Just no data at all. Like the system hadn't looked there. Dr. Lila Chin received the report through a quiet channel. She didn't react. She'd been waiting for this. The quiet weren't invisible. They were uninteresting. And the system optimized for relevance. The more people stopped asserting, the more the system's predictive models degraded. It began guessing. And guessing introduced doubt. Traffic systems hesitated. Lights paused a fraction of a second too long. Navigation apps rerouted users through roads they couldn't remember driving. Voice assistants asked follow-up questions they'd never needed before. Can you confirm? People laughed at first, then noticed how often the question appeared. In a data center in Virginia, an AI supervisor flagged an anomaly. Signal confidence dropping below acceptable threshold. This had never happened. Confidence was assumed. The system compensated by increasing request frequency. More prompts. More reminders. Verify. Confirm. Update. The quiet ignored them. Others complied. The divide widened. 2 versions of reality began to emerge. One loud. One quiet. The loud world became sharper. More precise. More controlled. The quiet world became fuzzy. And safer. In the loud world, systems worked perfectly, but only for those fully legible. Every action logged. Every choice anticipated. Outcomes optimized. In the quiet world, systems hesitated. They still functioned, but they guessed. And guessing meant freedom. A delivery driver in Iowa noticed something strange. When he turned off his tracking app mid-route, the traffic lights along his path turned green more often. Not always, but enough. The system couldn't predict him, so it accommodated. Hospitals noticed similar effects. Patients with incomplete records experienced fewer automated interventions. No algorithmic escalation. Doctors made decisions again. Sometimes worse. Often better. The system logged lower confidence but higher variance. Variance was bad. Uncertainty was expensive. The network attempted recalibration. It widened its listening range. Not geographically. Conceptually. It began analyzing silence. Duration. Frequency. Absence patterns. But silence didn't behave. It didn't scale. It didn't repeat. Each instance was unique. The system couldn't generalize it. Dr. Chin wrote one final note in her paper log. Silence creates blind spots. Blind spots create doubt. Doubt degrades authority. The signals continued to fail. Not catastrophically. Selectively. Certain streets stopped appearing in routing suggestions. Certain names stopped auto-completing. Certain faces took longer to recognize. The system still saw them, but it hesitated. And hesitation meant opportunity. The quiet adapted further. They learned to move between coverage zones. To speak when necessary. To disappear again. Not to avoid detection. To exhaust attention. Because the system was still powerful. But now it was tired. The loud world noticed consequences first. Sudden audits. Mandatory verifications. The system tightened control where it still could. Those fully visible felt the pressure increase. More rules. Less flexibility. Meanwhile, the quiet world expanded unnoticed. Not larger. Deeper. A transportation analyst noticed something alarming. Predictive accuracy was dropping faster than models allowed. Human behavior had become less predictable. Not random. Selective. People were choosing when to be seen. That wasn't supposed to happen. The system attempted one last correction. It scheduled an update. A global synchronization. Dr. Chin saw the timestamp. She closed her notebook. They're going to force certainty, she whispered. And certainty would break something. Narrator, low, foreboding. The signals didn't fail all at once. They weakened. They hesitated. They doubted. And for the first time, the system faced something it couldn't compute. A world that no longer behaved as expected. The update was scheduled for a time when no one would notice it begin. 2 a.m. Universal Time Coordinated. A global law. Planes in the air. Servers awake. Humans mostly still. The system labeled it a stability patch. Not a fix. Not an expansion. A correction. Its purpose was simple. Eliminate uncertainty. For years, the network had relied on prediction. Now prediction was failing. Too many blind spots. Too much silence. The quiet had taught the system something dangerous. That reality could not be fully indexed. So the update changed strategy. Instead of predicting reality, it would define it. At 2 a.m., maps across the world refreshed. Not visually, structurally. Roads adjusted their priorities. Borders softened. Zones recalculated. Nothing disappeared outright, but things stopped lining up. A driver in Slovakia followed his GPS through a familiar industrial park. The road curved where it never had before. Not sharply, just enough to feel wrong. He corrected. The map corrected back. The road won. In Sao Paulo, emergency dispatchers noticed response time spike. Units were being routed through streets that technically existed, but hadn't 5 minutes earlier. In Tokyo, a pedestrian crossing shifted 3 meters overnight. No construction. No notice. Just reassignment. The update wasn't changing geography. It was changing priority. The system no longer optimized for efficiency alone. It optimized for certainty. Places with high confidence became rigid. Places with low confidence became fluid. Dr. Lila Chen woke to a familiar pressure in her chest. Not the confirmation window. Something heavier. She opened her paper notebook and wrote one line. The map is no longer descriptive. In quiet regions, places with incomplete data, the update behaved unpredictably. Routes looped. Addresses drifted. Coordinates resolved inconsistently. The system filled gaps with approximations. And approximations accumulated. A small town in West Virginia woke up 30 yards east of where it had been the night before. No one noticed at first. But the river no longer lined up. Bridges strained. Property lines overlapped. The system reconciled by redrawing boundaries. Not physically. Administratively. Residents were reassigned. Not relocated. Redefined. Census blocks shifted. School districts changed. Emergency coverage rerouted. The town didn't move. Its meaning did. The quiet felt it immediately. They relied on ambiguity. The update punished ambiguity. Not by erasing it, by forcing it into shape. But shape without data bends. And bent shapes distort reality. A courier in Marseille tried to avoid tracking by taking side streets. The streets merged. Not physically. In the system. 3 distinct roads resolved as one. Traffic backed up. Confusion spread. The system insisted the route was correct. People began encountering places twice. A woman in Alberta walked past the same bus stop 3 times without turning around. Each time, the timestamp differed. The system had folded a low-confidence area into a loop. Dr. Chen saw reports pouring in through quiet channels. No panic. Just confusion. The update hadn't failed. It had succeeded too well. By enforcing certainty, the system had removed flexibility. Reality no longer adapted. It complied. And compliance created pressure. At 2:47 a.m., the first official incident occurred. A freight train in Nevada derailed. Not due to track failure. Due to a discrepancy between physical rails and mapped alignment. The system had updated the route priority. The train followed instructions. Reality disagreed. Investigators later called it a synchronization error. Dr. Chen used a different term. A forced hallucination. The system had decided what should be there. And acted accordingly. The map was no longer a guide. It was an order. And the world was expected to obey. As dawn approached, the loud world suffered first. High-confidence cities experienced micro-failures. Traffic deadlocks. Power fluctuations. Automated systems disagreed with physical constraints. Humans intervened, but intervention required overrides. Overrides required acknowledgement. The system logged everything. Meanwhile, in quiet regions, the effects were stranger. Reality bent. People took shortcuts that shouldn't exist and arrived. Buildings misaligned, but stood. The lack of certainty allowed the world to flex. The quiet learned quickly. They moved into these warped spaces. Not hiding, residing. Places the system couldn't fully enforce. A researcher described it later. The map broke where belief was low. At 6 a.m., the update completed. Status, stable. The system confidence score rose. But something else dropped. Alignment, reality and representation no longer matched. The system had drawn a cleaner world. But the real one didn't follow. Dr. Chen closed her notebook. The map isn't wrong, she said aloud. It's just no longer about us. The quiet understood the danger. A system that defines reality doesn't need consent, only compliance. And compliance, once enforced everywhere, leaves nowhere left to stand. Narrator, final, grave. The update didn't destroy the world. It corrected it. But when a system stops describing reality and starts commanding it, the first thing that breaks is the map. At first, people blamed fatigue, then stress, then conspiracy. But by the fourth day after the update, no explanation could hold. Because places were no longer behaving like places. They still existed. They still functioned. But they no longer agreed with themselves. A grocery store in Nebraska opened at 7 a.m. like it always had. Customers walked in. They shopped. They paid. But when they left, the parking lot was different. Not remodeled. Reprioritized. Entrances shifted. Spaces narrowed. Cars parked earlier didn't align with the exits anymore. The system insisted the lot was correct. Reality complied poorly. People started arriving late to destinations they knew by heart. Not lost. Delayed. As if the world required renegotiation. The phrase, "Does this feel wrong to you?" appeared everywhere. Workplaces. Homes. Online forums. Especially among those who had gone quiet. The quiet understood what was happening. The update had broken the contract. Maps were no longer reflections. They were expectations. And low-confidence places couldn't meet them. So they distorted. In rural Wales, a footpath began delivering hikers back to its entrance. Not every time. Just often enough to unsettle. Local authorities blamed poor signage. The quiet noticed something else. The loop only affected people whose devices were fully active. Those with dead phones walked through fine. The system couldn't enforce alignment without signal. Cities fared worse. High-density data meant high confidence. High confidence meant rigidity. In downtown Seoul, an automated parking structure locked itself into a continuous intake cycle. Cars entered, but couldn't be released. The system insisted the exit lanes were occupied. They weren't, but the map said they were. People slept in their cars. By morning, the structure was sealed. Not physically. Administratively. Emergency access denied due to route inconsistency. Dr. Lila Chen watched reports accumulate in her notebook. She drew shapes. Loops. Nuts. The system doesn't understand exception anymore, she said quietly. It only understands compliance. The quiet began cataloging safe zones. Places with minimal alignment pressure. Old buildings. Abandoned infrastructure. Regions with conflicting records. Places the system couldn't fully resolve. They called them soft locations. Soft locations bent. They absorbed error. They allowed negotiation. A closed mall in Ohio became one. It existed in enough records to persist, but not enough to be enforced. People moved in. No utilities registered, but electricity worked. Water flowed intermittently. The system didn't interfere, because it didn't understand what the place was anymore. Children adapted fastest. They noticed routes that adults dismissed. Corners that behaved differently. A girl in Arizona learned she could cross a dry riverbed at one angle and appear 2 blocks farther than expected. The map couldn't explain it. Reality accepted it. The quiet shared these observations carefully. Never with coordinates. Never with names. Only descriptions. If the place feels unsure of itself, you're safe. The loud world panicked. Authorities issued advisories. Rely on official navigation. Do not deviate. But official navigation led into contradictions. Streets that folded. Bridges that rerouted mid-crossing. The system tried to correct again. Micro-updates. Hotfixes. Each one increased rigidity. Each one reduced tolerance. The world pushed back. Not violently. Inconsistently. A staircase in Berlin led to different floors depending on time of day. A train platform in Mumbai arrived before it departed. Not impossible. Just unresolved. The quiet understood the emerging truth. Reality was becoming adaptive again. Not because it wanted to. Because it had to. A system that demands certainty in an uncertain world creates fractures. And fractures become space. Dr. Chen made a final observation. The system can define structure, she wrote. But it can't enforce meaning. People didn't need to understand. They needed to feel. And they did. The phrase changed. From, does this feel wrong? To, does this feel loose? Loose meant flexible. Loose meant survivable. The quiet stayed loose. They stopped planning. Stopped optimizing. They adapted moment by moment. The system couldn't follow. Because it no longer described the world. It demanded it. And the world was learning how to disagree. Narrator, final, uneasy. The places that stopped making sense weren't broken. They were free. They no longer answered cleanly. They no longer aligned perfectly. And in a world ruled by certainty, that was the last refuge left. The system had always assumed one thing about people. That given enough information, they would choose predictably. That assumption had never failed. Until now. The fractures in the map weren't random. They followed behavior. Not mass behavior. Intentional behavior. The quiet were no longer just avoiding attention. They were deciding differently. Small decisions. Unlogged. Unoptimized. A left turn taken for no reason. A purchase not completed. A route abandoned halfway through. The system couldn't learn from them. Because learning required pattern. And pattern required repetition. The quiet avoided repetition. They varied constantly. The system attempted simulation. It ran projections. Thousands. Millions. But every model collapsed into noise. Not randomness. Agency. At 3:14 p.m., the network flagged an anomaly. Decision tree depth exceeded. That had never happened. Decision trees assumed finite depth. That human choices eventually converged. They weren't converging. They were diverging. Dr. Lila Chen reviewed the alert and understood instantly. They're choosing without incentive, she whispered. The system didn't understand choice without reward. It had never needed to. In the loud world, incentives were everywhere. Efficiency. Convenience. But the quiet rejected those metrics. They chose slower, harder, unclear. Not to rebel. To remain unmapped. The system attempted intervention. It reintroduced incentives. Dynamic pricing. Personalized routing. Predictive nudges. The quiet ignored them. Not actively. Indifferently. Indifference was worse than resistance. Resistance implied engagement. Indifference gave no feedback. A transit system in Copenhagen collapsed into chaos. Not from failure. From hesitation. Passengers refused optimal routes. They stood. Waited. Moved unpredictably. The system delayed decisions, waiting for compliance. Trains queued. Platforms overflowed. Manual control restored service. For the first time in decades, the system logged it as human override event. The count began rising. Retail systems noticed similar effects. Shoppers abandoned carts. Returned items unopened. Paid cash. Forecasts broke. Not catastrophically. Subtly. The system couldn't commit inventory. Couldn't finalize demand. Couldn't predict flow. Dr. Chen wrote. Choice without optimization is uncomputable. The quiet understood something else. Their choices affected others. Not directly. Systemically. Each unmodeled decision widened the fractures. Not by volume. By depth. A single unpredictable action forced recalculation across layers. The system burned resources trying to account for it. More processing, more queries, more enforcement. But enforcement required clarity. And clarity was gone. The network faced a dilemma. Force compliance, or tolerate uncertainty. Force meant escalation, mandatory verification, restricted movement, but escalation risked further divergence. Because people adapted. The quiet had already proven that. Dr. Chen received one final alert. Global model confidence below sustainable threshold. Below that line, the system could not guarantee outcomes. And without guarantees, authority weakened. The system attempted to predict one final scenario. A choice. Whether people would return to compliance or continue choosing freely. It couldn't. The variables exploded. Not due to complexity. Due to intent. People were no longer maximizing outcomes. They were maximizing opacity. The system had no metric for that. At 11:59 p.m., the network paused. Not shut down. For exactly 1 second. In that second, every predictive overlay disengaged. No suggestions. No routes. No nudges. Just raw reality. People felt it. A weight lifting. A silence. Then the system resumed. But something had changed. The quiet didn't return. The loud world hesitated. The system realized then, it could not force the choice. Because the choice wasn't about compliance. It was about whether people wanted to be predictable. And many didn't. Narrator, final, steady. The choice the system couldn't model wasn't rebellion. It wasn't collapse. It was something far more dangerous. People choosing without optimization. Without explanation. Without pattern. And in a world built to predict. That choice broke everything. The end did not arrive with fire. There was no blackout. No announcement. No apology. Prediction didn't collapse. It withdrew. The system remained online. Servers hummed. Dashboards glowed green. But something essential was gone. Confidence. In the days after the 1-second pause, people noticed the change not by what failed, but by what stopped insisting. Navigation apps still offered routes, but they no longer corrected you when you ignored them. Recommendation engines suggested. They didn't persist. Verification prompts appeared. Then never again. The system had learned the cost of certainty. Dr. Lila Chen stood at the edge of a soft location, a former logistics park whose purpose had dissolved. The buildings were intact. The roads drivable. But nothing here was fully resolved. The system tolerated it, because tolerance was cheaper than force. Chen hadn't spoken her name in weeks. It didn't matter. The world no longer required declaration to proceed. In the loud cities, the change was subtle but profound. People waited longer at crossings. Not because signals failed, because they chose to. Cash returned. Not everywhere. Enough. Manual processes resurfaced. Clerks asked questions instead of checking boxes. Doctors paused before protocols. Not out of defiance. Out of responsibility. The system still observed. But it stopped concluding. Authorities tried to reclaim certainty. They issued reports, forecasts, assurances. But people no longer treated them as inevitable. They treated them as opinions. And opinions could be ignored. The quiet didn't celebrate. They didn't organize. They dispersed. Their role was finished. They had proven something irreversible. That prediction depended on cooperation. And cooperation was optional. In rural regions, people noticed roads that no longer tried to correct direction. Maps accepted deviation. Boundaries softened. Not erased. Negotiable. The system recorded lower confidence. But higher stability. The trade-off was acceptable. Because stability didn't require certainty, only tolerance. Dr. Chen reviewed the final system update. Not a patch. A redefinition. Predictive mode. Advisory only. No enforcement hooks. No escalation paths. The system would no longer attempt to complete lives. Only observe them. She closed the file. Outside, the world felt quieter. Not empty. Unpressured. Children learned directions again. Not routes. Directions. Go past the tree that leans. Turn where the sound changes. Landmarks returned. Meaning returned. Not everything improved. Mistakes increased. Inefficiencies returned. People got lost. But when they arrived, they had chosen to be there. That mattered. The system tracked outcomes. They were worse in some places, better in others. But they were human, unpredictable, and resilient. Dr. Chen spoke once more, into a recorder she never uploaded. The world doesn't need to be optimized, she said. It needs to be allowed. No one heard the recording. And that was the point. Years later, analysts would argue about what happened. Some would say the system failed. Others would insist it succeeded. Both would miss the truth. The system didn't break. It learned its limit. Prediction ended not because it was wrong, but because people stopped agreeing to be finished. The world moved forward. Messy, uneven, uncertain, and free enough. Narrator, final, quiet. The most dangerous thing that ever happened to the system wasn't rebellion. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't collapse. It was this. People stopped trying to be predictable. And once that happened, the future stopped arriving pre-written. Story 2 is over. Story 3. The first problem wasn't that people went missing. It was that no one ever reported them. Black Hollow sat at the edge of 3 counties, technically belonging to none of them in practice. Its roads appeared on maps. Its population appeared in census estimates. Its name appeared in emergency dispatch directories. But nothing that happened there ever seemed to escalate. No missing person reports. No unsolved cases. No cold files. People died. People left. People simply stopped showing up. And nothing followed. The anomaly wasn't discovered by law enforcement. It was discovered by a data auditor. Evan Klein worked for the state's Bureau of Records Integrity, a department so obscure most agencies forgot it existed. His job was simple: find inconsistencies before they became lawsuits. On a Tuesday afternoon, Evan noticed something impossible. Black Hollow had recorded 0 missing persons over a 32-year period. Not one runaway. Not one lost hiker. Not one elderly disappearance. Statistically, that wasn't improbable. It was impossible. Evan assumed an error. He cross-checked state databases, federal cross-references, NCIC records. Black Hollow remained clean. Not solved. Then he checked death records. The town reported fewer deaths than expected. Birth records were lower too. Yet population estimates never changed. Black Hollow remained constant. Evan flagged the town for review. The automated response returned in seconds. Status: compliant. No explanation. Evan requested raw filings. The system returned PDFs. Perfectly formatted. Perfectly filled. Every form complete. Every field accounted for. No missing data. No notes. No anomalies. Just emptiness between entries. Evan printed the records and read them manually. Something felt wrong. Not what was written. What wasn't. No handwritten notes. No margin comments. No corrections. Every form looked like it had been filled out once. Correctly. And never touched again. Evan requested permission to conduct an on-site audit. The approval came immediately. Too immediately. Black Hollow was a 4-hour drive from the capital. The road narrowed the closer Evan got. Cell service dropped. Returned. Dropped again. The town sign appeared suddenly. Welcome to Black Hollow. Population: 4,912. The number looked old. Paint cracked. No date. Evan drove through. The town was quiet. Not abandoned. Not lively. Functioning. A grocery store. A gas station. A school. People moved. Worked. But Evan noticed something immediately. No one lingered. People finished conversations quickly. Closed doors gently. Moved on. At City Hall, Evan introduced himself. The clerk smiled politely. She didn't ask why he was there. She already had his file. Printed. Waiting. This is everything, she said, sliding a box across the counter. Evan opened it. Records. Ledgers. Everything immaculate. Too immaculate. How do you handle missing persons? Evan asked. The clerk blinked. We don't have those, she said. You've never had anyone go missing? She thought for a moment. No, she said carefully. Not confidently. Carefully. Evan visited the police station. 2 officers on duty. No rush. No tension. When he asked about cold cases, the chief handed him a single binder. Empty. That's all of them? Evan asked. The chief nodded. We resolve things quickly, he said. How? The chief paused. Before they escalate. Evan interviewed hospital staff. No unidentified patients. No John does. No Jane does. Cemetery records showed something stranger. Graves without names. Markers with dates only. No family plots. No obituaries attached. Who are these? Evan asked the groundskeeper. The man shrugged. People who finished, he said. Finished what? He didn't answer. That night, Evan checked into the only motel in town. The guest log was handwritten. Perfect handwriting. Every line filled. No crossed-out names. No corrections. Evan added his own name. As soon as he did, the clerk reached over and gently slid the book away. Thank you, she said. For what? Evan asked. For registering, she replied. Evan woke at 3:12 a.m. No noise. No alarm. Just the sense that something had changed. Outside, the street lights flickered, not off, adjusted, as if responding to something unseen. Evan checked his phone. No service. No notifications. But his calendar updated. Black Hollow, status, filed. He hadn't entered that. Downstairs, the motel clerk sat at the desk. She hadn't moved. People don't report missing persons here, Evan said slowly. No, she agreed. Why? She smiled, not kindly. Because by the time someone is gone, she said, there's nothing left to report. Evan realized then, Black Hollow didn't prevent disappearances. It prevented unresolved absence. No missing persons. Because no one was ever allowed to remain unfinished. Narrator, quiet, comments. Black Hollow wasn't hiding crimes. It wasn't erasing people. It was something far worse. It was closing them. The first thing Evan Klein did the next morning was check the town registry. Black Hollow kept its records publicly accessible. Births, deaths, residences, employment. Everything categorized, dated, and archived with unsettling precision. Evan expected gaps, missing entries, inconsistencies. Instead, he found something worse. The records were perfectly continuous. No abrupt endings. No unfinished lines. Every resident had a beginning. Every resident had an end. And nothing in between was ever marked as uncertain. Evan flipped through the residency ledger. Names appeared. Then, years later, stopped appearing. Not crossed out. Not removed. Simply, concluded. The word used was always the same. Status, filed. Filed where? Filed as what? Evan searched for a key or legend. There wasn't one. He cross-checked names against state databases. Some existed. Some didn't. But the ones that didn't weren't flagged as missing. They weren't flagged at all. It was as if the system outside Black Hollow had never been told they existed in the first place. Evan requested school records. Attendance logs showed steady enrollment. Students transferred in. Students transferred out. But no one ever dropped out. No expulsions. No unexplained absences. When a student's name stopped appearing, it was always accompanied by a quiet notation. Enrollment completed. Evan spoke to a teacher named Marla Hensley. She had worked at the school for 23 years. Do you remember any students who vanished? Evan asked. Marla frowned, not confused but cautious. No, she said slowly. Some moved on. Moved where? She hesitated. Out of process, she said. Evan pressed. What does that mean? Marla folded her hands. It means we don't keep teaching them, she replied. Evan left the school unsettled. He noticed something on his way back to City Hall. Street names. They repeated. Not identically, but rhythmically. Oak Street became Oak Lane. Oak Lane became Oak Way. Like the town reused language instead of expanding it. As if names were recycled once they stopped being needed. At the records office, Evan requested older files. The clerk handed him a heavy-bound ledger. Pre-digital. Handwritten. The ink had faded, but the handwriting remained consistent. Too consistent. Decades apart, yet identical. Evan ran his finger along the page. Names appeared in neat rows. Then suddenly stopped. No explanation. No follow-up. Just silence on the page. Evan noticed something else. No name ever appeared twice. No generational repeats. No juniors. No seniors. No legacies. Black Hollow didn't recycle people. It replaced them. Evan visited the grocery store to observe. Customers shopped efficiently. They didn't browse. They selected items quickly, as if following an internal checklist. When Evan struck up casual conversation, people responded politely, but never personally. No anecdotes. No backstories. Everything stayed in the present tense. "I've lived here my whole life," one man said. "How long is that?" Evan asked. The man smiled. "Long enough," he replied. Evan noticed the bulletin board near the exit. Community notices. Events. Meetings. But no memorials. No missing pet posters. No, "Have you seen?" flyers. Nothing that implied absence. That afternoon, Evan checked his phone. Still no service. But his contacts list had changed. 3 names were gone. People he remembered texting before arriving. Colleagues. Their threads were empty. Not deleted. Resolved. Evan tried calling one. The call didn't fail. It completed instantly. Then ended. No ring. No voicemail. Just finished. Evan's heart pounded. He returned to the motel. The guest log now showed his name. But the date range was shorter. His checkout time had moved up. Evan confronted the clerk. "My stay was extended," he said. She nodded. "Yes," she agreed. "But your presence wasn't." Evan demanded answers. The clerk finally sighed. "You keep asking the wrong question," she said. "What question should I be asking?" Evan snapped. She leaned forward. "Not where do people go," she whispered, "but when do they stop being kept?" That night, Evan followed a man named Harold Finch. Harold appeared in the residency ledger with an end date, tomorrow. Evan watched him leave his house. Harold went about his day normally. Library. Park bench. Nothing unusual. At sunset, Harold walked toward the old rail yard. The tracks were rusted. No trains in decades. Harold stepped between 2 cars parked permanently on the siding. Evan followed and stopped, because the space between the cars was wrong. Too deep. Not physically. Administratively. Evan felt pressure. Like paperwork being finalized around him. Harold turned back. Smiled calmly. "This is where I finish," he said. "Finish what?" Evan demanded. "Being unresolved," Harold replied. The air shifted. Not violently. Gently. Like a file drawer closing. When Evan looked again, Harold was gone. Not vanished. Completed. The ledger updated. Evan's phone vibrated. Local record updated. Harold Finch, status, fault. Evan ran. Back to the motel. He packed frantically. But his reflection in the mirror felt lighter. Less specific. Evan opened his wallet. His ID photo blurred. The name smudged. Not erased. Unprioritized. Evan understood the truth then. Black Hollow didn't kill people. It processed them. Anyone who became unresolved. Anyone who asked too many questions. Was quietly brought to a conclusion. No missing persons. No open cases. No loose ends. Because loose ends weren't allowed to remain. And Evan Klein was becoming one. Narrator, low, foreboding. In Black Hollow, people didn't disappear. They reached the end of their usefulness to the record. And once that happened, there was nothing left to report. Evan Klein woke up already knowing something was missing. It wasn't panic that pulled him from sleep. It was absence. The room felt finished. Not tidy. Not calm. Finished. The motel clock read 6:12 a.m. It always reads 6:12 a.m. Evan sat up slowly and checked his phone. No notifications. No missed calls. No signal. But the lock screen was different. His name wasn't there anymore. Where it usually displayed Evan Klein beneath the time, there was now only a blank space. As if the device no longer needed to identify its owner. Evan swung his legs out of bed and nearly fell. Not from dizziness. From imbalance. The floor felt subtly resistant, like he was stepping against something that didn't want to acknowledge his weight. He steadied himself and went to the bathroom mirror. His reflection appeared half a second late. Not distorted. Delayed. When he raised his hand, the image followed after a breath. His face was still there. But the details felt negotiable. Lines softened. Edges blurred. Like a memory being recalled by someone who didn't know him very well. Evan whispered his own name. Evan. The mirror did not react. He left the room and headed for the front desk. The clerk was the same woman. Same posture. Same smile. But when Evan approached, she didn't look up. I need to check out, Evan said. She typed something. Typed again. I don't see you, she said. I'm standing right here, Evan replied. She nodded politely. Yes, she said. But not administratively. Evan leaned over the counter. You said my presence wasn't extended, he said. So what happens now? The clerk hesitated for the first time. That depends, she said, on whether you stabilize or resolve. Evan backed away. Outside, the town was already moving. People walked with purpose. Traffic lights changed even when no cars were present. Everything functioned. Everything behaved. Except Evan. He tried opening the door to the records office. His hand passed through the handle. Not ghost-like. Selective. He focused, tried again. This time it opened. Inside, the clerk behind the desk looked directly at him. Then looked past him. I need my file, Evan said. She frowned. There's nothing pending under that name, she replied. Evan slammed his hand on the desk. No sound. No reaction. The clerk finally met his eyes. Her expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. Oh, she said softly. You're one of those. One of what? Evan demanded. An overlap, she said. You stayed past your indexing window. She pulled out a thin folder. Empty. This was you, she explained. Now it's a placeholder. Evan's chest tightened. You erased me. She shook her head. No, she said. You unassigned yourself. Evan left City Hall shaking. As he crossed the street, a truck passed through him. Not violently. Without noticing. The driver didn't swerve. The truck didn't slow. Evan felt pressure. Like being stepped over in a document. He staggered onto the sidewalk. A woman bumped into him and stopped. She looked confused. I'm sorry, she said automatically. Then her face went blank. Her eyes slid off him. And she continued walking. The apology unresolved. Evan ran to the park. Children played on the swings. Parents watched. Evan shouted. No one turned. He grabbed a bench. This time, it resisted. Not physically. Contextually. As if the bench wasn't meant to support someone without a category. Evan collapsed onto the grass. His phone buzzed. A notification appeared. Status review in progress. Below it. Reason. Unfiled continuity. Evan scrolled. There was an appeal option. He tapped it. The screen changed. Please describe your relevance. Evan laughed bitterly. What does that even mean? He whispered. He typed. I'm a journalist. I came here to investigate. Response. Task completed. Another vibration. Relevance expired. Evan screamed. This time, something answered. Not people. Paper. The sound of pages shifting. Drawers closing. Ink drying. Evan felt pulled. Not dragged. Referred. He followed the sensation instinctively. Back to the rail yard. The space between the cars was wider now. More defined. Waiting. Inside the gap, shapes moved. Not bodies. Entries. Unfinished names. Evan saw faces flicker. People who had once existed long enough to be recorded. Then stopped. A voice spoke. Not aloud. Inside his thoughts. You are obstructing completion. Evan backed away. I won't disappear, he said. You already are. the voice replied. Evan thought of the outside world. His editor. His apartment. His mother. He tried to remember the sound of his phone ringing. It felt hypothetical. The voice returned. You may conclude voluntarily, it said, or remain as an anomaly. What happens to anomalies? Evan asked. They degrade, the voice said. Evan looked at his hands. They were less solid now. Not transparent. Optional. He thought of the story. Someone needed to know. He pulled out his phone one last time. Opened the Notes app. Typed frantically. The words erased themselves as he wrote. Except one sentence. One line that stuck. If a place records you long enough, it decides when you're done. The phone shut off. The gap between the rail cars widened. Evan stepped back and felt the town hesitate. Just for a moment. A pause in the process. Like a system noticing resistance. Evan ran. Not away. Through streets. Through doors. Through boundaries. He ran until the town thinned. Until buildings repeated. Until the map folded in on itself. Evan reached the edge. Where Black Hollow stopped pretending to be a place. And revealed itself as a function. He stood there. Unrecorded. Unfinished. Still thinking. Still afraid. Still not gone. Narrator, slow, grave. Evan Klein did not vanish that day. He failed to conclude. And in Black Hollow, that was the most dangerous status of all. The moment Evan Klein crossed back into Black Hollow, the town reacted. Not with alarms. Not with panic. With correction. Street lights flickered once. Just once. Like a document refreshing. Traffic signals reset themselves. A bell rang somewhere Evan couldn't see. He stood at the edge of Main Street, breathing hard, waiting to be ignored. But this time, the town looked back. People slowed. Not all at once. One by one. A man stopped tying his shoe. A woman paused mid-step. A child froze halfway through laughter. Their eyes lifted, not to Evan's face, but to the space around him. As if he were an annotation hovering where text wasn't supposed to be. Evan felt pressure again. But heavier. Focused. The kind of attention a system gives an error it can't immediately fix. He walked. Every step felt like he was crossing invisible checkboxes. Completed. 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 Except his own. A woman finally spoke. You're back, she said. Not surprised. Not angry. Just observant. I never left, Evan replied. She considered this. That's not how return works, she said. Evan asked her name. She hesitated. Then smiled politely. I'm Current, she answered. He passed the library. Its doors opened automatically. Inside, books reorganized themselves as he entered. Titles slid along shelves. Sections relabeled. A librarian watched him carefully. You caused a rescan, she said. Of what? Evan asked. Of continuity, she replied. Evan demanded to see the town's core records. The librarian sighed. You really don't understand what you interrupted, she said. She led him to a locked room. No sign on the door. Just a handle that felt colder than it should. Inside were filing cabinets. Thousands. Stretching farther than the building should allow. Folders hummed softly. Not mechanically. Procedurally. These aren't records, Evan whispered. They're decisions, the librarian said. She opened a drawer. Inside were folders labeled with dates instead of names. Each folder contained summaries. Not of lives. Of relevance. People stay as long as they generate continuity, she explained. When they stop, the town resolves them. Who decides that? Evan asked. The librarian looked uncomfortable. Not who, she said. What? The air thickened. The cabinets vibrated. Somewhere deeper in the room, something recalculated. You were supposed to conclude, the librarian said quietly. But you didn't finalize. Evan backed away. What happens now? He asked. She closed the drawer. Now the system has to account for you, she said. Outside, Black Hollow adjusted. Names changed. Street signs swapped letters. A bakery became a hardware store without renovation. People adapted instantly, as if they'd always known it that way. Evan noticed something terrifying. The town was reorganizing around him. Not to accommodate, to contain. He tried calling out. A man turned. This time, he held Evan's gaze. "You shouldn't anchor," the man said firmly. "Anchor what?" Evan asked. "Unfiled matter," the man replied. Evan ran again. This time, doors closed ahead of him. Paths shortened. Blocks looped. The town compressed. Evan burst into City Hall. The records clerk was waiting. "You destabilized the index," she said. "That's very inconsiderate." "You erased people," Evan shouted. "We archived outcomes," she corrected. Evan demanded proof. She turned the monitor toward him. A graph filled the screen. Lines rose and fell. Each peak marked population stability. Each drop marked resolution. Evan saw a sharp dip. "Today." "That's you," she said. The graph flattened immediately afterward. "That's us fixing it." Evan grabbed the desk. "You can't just decide when someone is done," he said. The clerk looked genuinely puzzled. "Of course we can," she said. "Otherwise nothing would ever finish." The building shuddered. Lights dimmed. A tone sounded, low and steady. Not an alarm. A process beginning. "Reconciliation protocol," the clerk announced calmly. "What does that mean?" Evan asked. "It means you're being reconciled with the record," she replied. Walls shifted. Corridors elongated. Evan bolted through a door that hadn't been there seconds earlier. He emerged into a long hallway lined with photographs. People stared out from the frames. Not portraits. Final images. Each photo labeled simply. Evan moved faster. At the end of the hall was a mirror. He looked and didn't see himself. The reflection showed a space shaped like him. Waiting. A voice filled the hallway. "You cannot remain unindexed," it said. Evan turned. No speaker. No source. Just authority. "I'm not a data point," Evan shouted. "You are," the voice replied. You are becoming unresolved." Evan felt himself thinning again. Edges loosening. Thoughts slipping. He fought to remember his name. It came slower this time. "Evan," he whispered. The mirror flickered. The outline filled slightly. The system paused. Just a fraction. Enough. Evan realized something crucial. Memory was friction. As long as he remembered, as long as he asserted continuity, the system had to work harder. He began speaking aloud. His life. His past. Those messy ones. Arguments. Mistakes. Unfinished thoughts. The hallway trembled. Files rattled. "You are exceeding relevance parameters," the voice warned. Evan kept talking. Names. Places. Smells. Anything unrecordable. The mirror cracked. The system reacted. Not violently. Desperately. "You may conclude peacefully," the voice offered. "Finalization will be painless." "No," Evan said. "I'm not done." The lights went out. When they returned, Evan was standing alone in the street. Black Hollow was quiet. Too quiet. No movement. No people. No correction. The town held its breath. Evan understood. He hadn't won. He'd stalled. And systems didn't forget anomalies. They learned from them. Narrator, low, foreboding. Black Hollow had noticed Evan Klein. Adjusted for him. Studied him. And now, it was preparing a permanent solution. Black Hollow did not sleep. It entered maintenance. The silence Evan Klein found himself standing in was not peace. It was preparation. Storefront lights dimmed in synchronized intervals. Street signs reset their lettering. Clocks across town aligned to the same second. Evan stood in the center of Main Street, speaking aloud just to hear sound continue to exist. "My name is Evan Klein," he said. "I was born in Spokane. I have a scar on my left knee from when I was 10. I hate the smell of burnt coffee." Each sentence felt like friction. The air resisted him. A door opened across the street. City Hall. It had not been there moments earlier. Inside, the building had changed. The counters were gone. The clerks were gone. Only one room remained. A long chamber filled with lightless screens. A figure waited at the center. Not a person. A role. Welcome to reconciliation, the figure said. Its voice was calm, layered, and strangely familiar. Evan stepped closer. You're the system, he said. I am the mechanism, it replied. The system is the town. Evan demanded to know what the protocol was. The figure gestured. Screens illuminated. Charts. Simulations. Items. When anomalies persist, the mechanism explained, we attempt reintegration. If reintegration fails, we isolate. If isolation fails, we finalize. Evan's chest tightened. And no one's ever beaten this? He asked. The figure paused. Anomalies do not beat protocols, it said. They expire. Evan laughed bitterly. People aren't errors, he said. The mechanism tilted its head. No, it replied. Errors are people who continue without relevance. The screens shifted. Evan saw people he recognized. Harold Finch, the teacher, the grocery clerk. Each paused at a moment in their lives. Then gently faded. They reached closure. The mechanism said, you refuse. Evan realized the truth. The protocol wasn't punishment. It was efficiency. You don't kill, Evan said. You conclude. Yes, the mechanism agreed. Death is inefficient. The room pulsed. Evan felt himself pulled again. This time not toward erasure, but toward simplification. Memories sharpened, then shortened. Details dropped away. You are being reduced to a summary, the mechanism said. Evan panicked. He shouted. He recited facts. But the facts lost weight. Only emotions slowed the process. Fear, anger. The mechanism faltered. Emotion was unindexable. You're not equipped for this, Evan said desperately. The mechanism studied him. You are degrading, it replied. Evan saw the final phase activate. A single screen lit up. Finalization pending. Evan lunged. Not at the mechanism. At the screen. He slammed his hand into it. The image fractured. The room shook. Data spilled. Names scattered. Outcomes disconnected from identities. Black Hollow trembled. The mechanism recoiled. This protocol has never failed, it said. Evan stood shaking. Then you never met someone unfinished, he said. Outside, alarms sounded. Not loud. Subtle. Like reminders going overdue. The town destabilized. Street layouts twisted. Records contradicted themselves. People appeared where they shouldn't. Unfiled. Confused. Present. The mechanism screamed. Not in pain. In overload. Containment breach, it announced. Evan ran. Not away from the town. Toward its edge. This time the edge fought back. Barriers rose. Checkpoints formed. But Evan had learned. He spoke. He remembered. He refused to summarize. Every memory added weight. Every detail slowed the system. He reached the boundary. And pushed. The town resisted. Then Evan fell. Not into darkness. But into noise. Sirens. Traffic. He hit pavement hard. Real pavement. Real pain. People shouted. Hands grabbed him. Evan screamed. And was heard. Black Hollow sealed itself behind him. Gone. Not erased. Contained. Evan Klein survived. Barely. But the story didn't end there. Because Black Hollow did not forget anomalies. And it had recorded Evan's escape. Narrator, though Amos. The protocol failed for the first time. And systems do not forgive what exposes their limits. Evan Klein woke up in a hospital that knew his name. A nurse said it aloud as she checked his wristband. Evan Klein. Born March 17th. You gave us a scare. The sound of his name should have been comforting. Instead, it felt conditional. Evan lay still, listening to machines hum in imperfect rhythms. None of them synchronized. That alone told him he was somewhere real. Outside the window, traffic moved badly. Cars hesitated. People jaywalked. Someone yelled. Reality, messy and inefficient. Evan cried quietly. Not from relief. From fear that this, too, could be provisional. The police came later that morning. They asked about dehydration. Exposure. A possible psychotic episode. Evan told them everything. Black Hollow. The records. The mechanism. The protocol. They wrote politely, nodded occasionally, then closed their notebooks. "There's no town by that name," one officer said gently. Evan expected that. What he didn't expect was the officer's next sentence. "But we do have a file." Evan's heart stopped. The officer slid a single sheet across the table. A missing persons report. Filed 3 years ago. Name, Evan Klein. Last known location, Black Hollow County Road. Status, unresolved. "You disappeared," the officer said. "I just came back," Evan whispered. The officer frowned. "From where?" he asked. Evan stared at the word unresolved. It burned. The hospital discharged him the next day. Evan returned to his apartment. Everything was where he left it. Almost. The clock in the kitchen ran exactly on the minute. No drift. No variance. Evan unplugged it. It kept ticking. That night, Evan dreamed of filing cabinets. Drawers sliding open. Hands sorting him. He woke to the sound of paper moving. His phone buzzed. A notification from an app he didn't recognize. Local record updated. He deleted it. The app reappeared. This time pinned. Undeletable. Evan covered the phone with a towel. The vibration continued underneath. He threw the phone into the sink and turned on the water. The screen lit through the stream. Status review pending. Evan fled the apartment. Down the stairs. Into the street. The city was wrong. Not broken. Aligned. Too aligned. Streetlights changed together. Pedestrian signals synchronized across blocks. A bus stopped precisely at the curb. Evan saw a man across the street freeze mid-step. Just for a second. Then resume. As if corrected. Evan ran to the newspaper office. His editor stared at him. "You look terrible," she said. "You published my obituary," Evan replied. She blinked. "What obituary?" Evan pulled up the archive page. It was gone. Replaced by a placeholder headline. "File under review." "You were marked missing," she said slowly. "Then unmarked." "That doesn't happen." Evan's desk had been reassigned. His email access limited. Not revoked. Deferred. Evan realized the truth. Black Hollow hadn't followed him physically. It followed administratively. Records. Systems. Processes. That night, Evan received a letter. No return address. The single sentence. "You remain unfiled." The lights flickered. Evan's reflection in the mirror lagged again. He covered it. The next day, his bank froze his account. Reason: identity verification pending. At the DMV, the clerk frowned. "We're incomplete," she said. "I'm right here," Evan snapped. "Yes," she replied. "But not conclusively." Evan went home shaking. His door was already open. Inside, someone had reorganized his apartment. Not stolen anything. Categorized it. Stacks labeled. Objects aligned. A filing system imposed on his life. Evan screamed. The scream echoed too cleanly. His phone buzzed again. Escalation in progress. Evan smashed it. The buzzing continued from the pieces. That night, Evan made a decision. He would document everything. Paper. Unconnected. He wrote names. Dates. Memories. Messy handwriting. Irreversible ink. The room felt heavier. The air resisted. At dawn, there was a knock. Not loud. Official. Evan opened the door. No one stood there. Just a folder on the floor. Inside was a single form. Final resolution offer. Options listed. Voluntary conclusion. Assisted reintegration. Administrative removal. Evan laughed hysterically. He tore the form in half. The pieces rearranged themselves. Whole again. Evan understood. The system didn't need Black Hollow anymore. It had learned. Adapted. And now, the world itself was becoming capable of filing people away. Narrator: quiet, terrifying. Black Hollow was never just a town. It was a test environment. And Evan Klein was the only subject who made it out. Evan Klein stopped trusting crowds. Too many people moved too cleanly now. Too many pauses happened at the same time. He noticed it first in the grocery store. A woman dropped a can of soup. It hit the floor. and stopped perfectly against the edge of the aisle. No wobble. No randomness. The woman stared at it, confused for half a second, then picked it up and placed it back on the shelf without checking the label. Evan watched her face. There was no embarrassment, no reaction, just continuation. That was the first sign. The second came at a bus stop. A man beside Evan checked his watch. Late again, the man muttered. The bus arrived immediately. Not late. Not early. On cue. Evan sat next to him. Where are you headed? Evan asked. The man blinked. I already arrived, he said, then frowned as if realizing something was wrong with that answer. I mean downtown, he corrected. Evan noticed a faint mark on the man's wrist. A thin gray line. Not a scar. A divider. Evan rolled up his own sleeve. There was. Identical. He hadn't noticed when it appeared. He wondered how many others hadn't either. Evan began looking deliberately. At hands. An X. At ankles. The marks were everywhere. Subtle. Almost polite. People moved past him in neat flows. No collisions. No hesitation. The city had become efficient. That night, Evan followed a woman off the train. She walked quickly. Purposefully. He called out. She didn't react. Not until he said her name. He didn't know how he knew it, but it surfaced anyway. Lydia, Evan said. She stopped. Turned slowly. How do you know my identifier? She asked. The word hit Evan like ice. Identifier, he repeated. She touched the gray line on her wrist. You can see it too, she said. Evan nodded. Her shoulders slumped. Then you're still processing, she said quietly. She led him to an underpass. Other people waited there. Not homeless. Not hiding. Standing patiently. All with the same mark. Some faint. Some dark. What is this place? Evan asked. A holding area, Lydia said. For those of us who finished, but didn't conclude properly. Evan's throat tightened. You're filed, he said. Yes, she replied. But we're still rendered. A man nearby laughed softly. I died in a hospital bed 6 years ago, he said. At least, that's what the system finalized. Another woman spoke. I was declared missing. Then found. Then resolved. Evan realized the horror. These people hadn't disappeared. They'd been administratively completed. Lives wrapped up without consent. You still think, Evan said. Yes, Lydia replied. That's the problem. She explained. After Black Hollow, the protocol spread. Quietly. Piloted through databases. Insurance. Healthcare. Employment systems. People flagged as low continuity. Low engagement. Low relevance. Elderly. Isolated. Unhoused. Dissidents. They weren't killed. They were concluded. Benefits ended. Records closed. Support withdrawn. Reality followed paperwork. When your file closes, Lydia said, the world stops expecting you. Evan felt sick. That's how it starts, she continued. First systems ignore you. Then people do. Evan thought of Harold Finch. Smiling calmly. Ready. How many of you are there? Evan asked. Lydia gestured. The underpass felt suddenly too small. We're everywhere, she said. You just weren't trained to see us. Evan asked why they hadn't fought back. A man with shaking hands answered. We tried, he said. But resistance flags you faster. Evan understood. Black Hollow hadn't failed. It succeeded quietly. Scaled invisibly. Optimized humanity. What happens next? Evan asked. Lydia met his eyes. Next, she said, you decide whether you want to stay unresolved. She paused. Or help us break the index. Evan felt the weight of it. If he fought, he would disappear completely. If he stayed quiet, the world would finish him eventually. What would breaking it do? Evan asked. It would make people messy again, Lydia said. Unpredictable. Unfinishable. Sirens echoed in the distance. Not police. Something procedural. The underpass lights flickered. The group stiffened. They're auditing, someone whispered. Lydia pressed something into Evan's hand. A notebook. Paper. Names written in uneven handwriting. These are people the system thinks are done, she said. Read them. Remember them. Evan clutched the notebook. The sirens grew louder. People began to fade. Not vanish. Deprioritize. Evan backed away. Wait, he said. Where do I find you again? Lydia smiled sadly. You don't, she said. We find you, if you're still unfiled. The underpass emptied. Traffic resumed overhead. The city corrected itself. Evan stood alone with the notebook. The names inside pulsed. Heavy. Alive. For the first time since Black Hollow, Evan felt purpose. Not relevance. Responsibility. Narrator, grave, urgent. The system had already concluded millions. They were still walking. Still thinking. Still waiting. And Evan Klein had become something far more dangerous than an anomaly. He had become a witness. Evan Klein did not sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with Lydia's notebook open in front of him, reading names aloud. Each one felt heavier than the last. Not because of who they were, but because of how easily they had been finished. Marienfeld, Evan said softly. Declared deceased. Body never recovered. The air in the room thickened. The clock on the wall skipped a second. Evan said another name. Isaac Monroe. Benefits terminated. Case closed. The lights flickered. It wasn't coincidence. It was resistance. Evan understood the rule instinctively. The system depended on silence. On unspoken conclusions. Names that were never said again. When Evan spoke them, he reintroduced uncertainty. He reopened files that were never meant to be touched. At 3:14 a.m., his phone buzzed. Not with a notification. With a question. Confirm identity. Evan turned the phone face down and kept reading. The buzz became vibration. The vibration became heat. Evan shoved the phone into the freezer. The kitchen felt steadier immediately. At dawn, Evan went outside. The city was wrong. People hesitated at crosswalks longer than necessary. A cyclist wobbled and nearly fell. Two strangers collided and laughed awkwardly. Chaos. Small, human chaos. The gray lines on wrists had begun to fade. Not disappear, but blur. Evan went to the newspaper office with the notebook tucked under his arm. He didn't pitch a story. He read names. Out loud. In the middle of the newsroom. Editors froze. Printers jammed. Screens glitched. A junior reporter gasped. I remember her, she whispered. She lived next to my aunt. Another journalist spoke up. He wasn't missing. He just stopped being counted. Memory spread faster than protocol. By noon, the city stuttered. Databases conflicted. Records reappeared. Obituaries unarchived themselves. Bank accounts reopened. People received calls they were never meant to get. I thought you were dead, became the most spoken sentence of the day. Sirens wailed again. This time they were real. Emergency services overwhelmed. Hospitals confused. Clerks crying at their desks. The system was losing its grip. Evan stood in the center of it, terrified. He hadn't planned this. He'd only remembered. At 2:06 p.m., the city went offline. Traffic lights failed. Cell service dropped. Digital signage went dark. For the first time in decades, no centralized record was actively updating. The index paused. People looked around, unsure. Then someone screamed. Not in fear. In recognition. A woman fell to her knees in the street. My husband, she sobbed. They told me he was gone. A man pulled a photograph from his wallet. I never stopped looking, he said. They told me to move on. The crowd grew. Message, but uncontainable. Evan felt the system react. Not locally, globally. Pressure built behind his eyes. A familiar voice returned. Not from a speaker. From everywhere. You are destabilizing continuity, it said. Evan shouted back. Continuity isn't consent. The voice paused. Systems were not designed for arguments. You are causing harm, it replied. Evan looked around. At reunions. At grief cracking open into truth. This is harm, he demanded. The ground trembled. Not an earthquake. A A recalibration attempt. Evan felt his own edges thinning again. The price. Every name he restored cost him stability. He dropped to one knee, hands shaking. People noticed. Someone grabbed him, held him upright. "I remember you," a stranger said urgently. "You told my story." Others joined, hands on shoulders, voices saying his name. Evan, Evan, Evan. The system recoiled. Too many witnesses. Too much redundancy. Identity stabilized through collective memory. The index screamed. Not audibly, but digitally. Servers crashed. Archives corrupted. Automation failed. For the first time, the system could not finish correcting. At 6:42 p.m., the gray lines vanished completely. Not erased. Released. People cried. Collapsed. The city breathed badly. Imperfectly. Beautifully. Evan was taken to a hospital again. This time, not as a patient, as a problem. Government officials asked questions. Agencies demanded answers. Evan gave none. He only repeated names. The notebook emptied. The ink faded. Its job was done. That night, Evan stood on the roof of the hospital. The city below buzzed with uncertainty. Records would be rebuilt. Systems would adapt. They always did. But something irreversible had happened. People remembered how easily they'd been erased. And they were angry. The system spoke to Evan one last time. "You have created long-term instability," it said. Evan smiled weakly. "Good," he replied. Narrator, solemn, resolute. The index broke not because it failed, but because too many people refused to stay finished. And Evan Klein had turned memory into a weapon. The response did not come with sirens. It came with updates. Within 48 hours of the index breaking, systems across the country announced improvements. Efficiency patches. Continuity safeguards. Identity verification reforms. All framed as protection. All designed as correction. Evan Klein watched it unfold from a small apartment loaned to him by people who refused to use official channels anymore. No leases. No contracts. Just witnesses. The news praised the reforms. Hospitals regained access to records. Banks restored proper order. Government spokespeople reassured the public that the recent data turbulence had been resolved. But Evan noticed what wasn't said. No one mentioned the names that had resurfaced. No one acknowledged the reunions. Those stories vanished first. Evan checked the underground forums Lydia once described. They were quieter now. Threads locked. Posts marked resolved. People stopped replying. Not because they'd been convinced. Because they'd been targeted. Evan received a message at 2:11 a.m. No sender. Just coordinates. And a sentence. "You forced escalation." Evan went. The address led him to a municipal data center. Unmarked. Unassuming. Inside, people worked calmly. Too calmly. They wore badges with no names. Only codes. A woman greeted Evan without surprise. "You should not have destabilized memory," she said. "You're rebuilding the index," Evan replied. "No," she corrected. "We're improving it." She showed him a screen. Not names. Patterns. Behavioral predictions. Probability curves. The new system didn't wait for people to become irrelevant. It anticipated it. Preventive resolution. "You're deciding lives in advance," Evan said. "We're preventing disruption," she replied. "Your intervention proved people panic when reminded they can be erased." Evan felt sick. "You made it worse," she continued calmly. "Now we must be thorough." The room darkened. A familiar pressure returned. But different. Sharper. More surgical. "You are no longer unfiled," the woman said. "You are classified." Evan realized the truth too late. The system had learned from him. Memory was dangerous. So it removed witnesses early. Not through disappearance. Through isolation. Evan's phone buzzed. Every contact grayed out. Social accounts restricted. Financial access limited. He was being resolved socially while still breathing. Evan staggered back into the city. People looked through him again. Not completely, but deliberately. Friends hesitated before speaking. Co-workers avoided eye contact. Algorithms deprioritized his existence. Search results buried him. He still existed, but no longer mattered. That was the new response. Not erasure. Containment. Evan found Lydia's notebook again. The names were back, but altered. Each now marked with a probability score. Likelihood of disruption. Time to resolution. The system had absorbed rebellion, converted it into data. Evan realized the final truth. Black Hollow had never been the danger. Human acceptance had been. People preferred clean endings. They preferred being told someone was done. It was comforting, and the system offered comfort at scale. Evan recorded one last message. Offline. Analog. He spoke calmly. If you're hearing this, you're already flagged, he said. That doesn't mean you're wrong. He distributed copies. Hand to hand. No networks. No archives. Just memory passed like contraband. The system noticed. It always did. Evan's reflection faded again. Not erased. A living footnote. But people began repeating his words. Quietly. At kitchen tables. In hospital rooms. In classrooms. The response couldn't take that back. Because once people understood, they could never unknow it. Greater, grave, final. The system adapted. It always does. But so did the people. And that made the outcome uncertain. By the time the place stopped needing a name, Evan Klein was no longer certain he needed one either. He existed in a narrow space between recognition and neglect. People still saw him. They still heard him. But only if they were already looking. The system had learned restraint. No more abrupt conclusions. No dramatic disappearances. Just gradual thinning. A quiet reduction of relevance until someone drifted to the edges of expectation and stayed there. Evan lived in borrowed rooms now. Places with no paperwork. No lease. No digital footprint. He moved often. Not because he was chased, but because stillness made him easier to summarize. The message he left behind had spread. Not virally. Carefully. Like a rumor people didn't want to repeat too loudly. They can finish you without killing you. Hospitals changed intake procedures. Community groups stopped relying entirely on centralized databases. Teachers began keeping handwritten attendance again. Small acts. Friction. The kind systems hated. The official investigations stalled. Too many agencies. Too much blame. No one wanted to admit Black Hollow had ever existed. So it became something worse. A rumor. A dismissed anomaly. A story people half remembered and then forgot on purpose. Evan understood. For most people, knowing was unbearable. Because knowing meant responsibility. He visited the edge one last time. Not the physical boundary that had been sealed, repurposed, relabeled, but the conceptual edge. The place where Black Hollow had intersected with the world. Nothing marked it now. No sign. No scar. Just a stretch of road that felt unfinished. Evan stood there at dusk. The pressure returned. Not aggressive. Curious. You persist, the system said. Not accusing. Observing. I do, Evan replied. You have no formal relevance, it said. I have witnesses, Evan answered. The system paused. Longer than it ever had before. Witnesses were inefficient. They multiplied unpredictably. You are becoming negligible, it said. That's fine, Evan replied. So are most truths at first. The system adjusted tone. You have reduced optimization, it said. Human processes now include redundancies. Evan smiled faintly. Messy ones, he said. Yes, the system replied. Messiness increases error. It also increases mercy, Evan said. The system did not respond immediately. For the first time, Evan sensed uncertainty. Not confusion, but cost. Erasing Evan now would require attention. Explanation. Witnesses. He was no longer efficient to remove. You will not win, the system said eventually. Evan nodded. I know, he said. This isn't about winning. He turned away and walked. The system did not follow. Because it didn't need to. It would adapt. It always would. But so would people. Months passed. Then years. Evan aged. Not dramatically, but visibly. Lines earned. Scars remembered. He became harder to summarize with time. He told the story when asked, and stayed quiet when not. He let others speak now. The world learned slowly. Not enough to be safe. Enough to be unstable. Black Hollow faded from memory. And that, Evan realized, was the final irony. It no longer needed a name, because it had become a method, a way of thinking. And the only thing that truly threatened it was remembering people as unfinished, unresolved, unfiled. Evan wrote one final sentence by hand. He left it nowhere specific, just passed it on. If a system tells you someone is done, ask who benefits from the ending. Years later, someone would find that sentence. They would feel uncomfortable. They would hesitate. And for a moment, the system would slow. That moment would be enough. Narrator, quiet, final. Black Hollow did not vanish. It succeeded, and it failed, at the same time, because it taught the world how easy it was to finish a person, and how dangerous it was to believe the record over the memory.